Broadcasting live from Washington, D.C., this is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Talking Left, your weekly alternative to the Sunday morning corporate news. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Shano.
Good morning. How are you?
I am doing great. We have a big show, and I don't know how we are ever going to get to all the news and stories we have.
That is the way we roll. And we don't need any excuse of having last week off.
No.
There's a lot going on.
Yes, a lot going on, and three amazing guests to help us talk about it this morning. Sam Sachs, political commentator, brilliant. He knows like everything.
He does.
Yeah, and he's got a great story about Cuban Twitter that you don't want to miss. Very interesting stuff. Hal Sparks, of course, of the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide,
which we hear on Saturdays on WCPT.
Yes, and
he does a couple other things too.
Just a few.
Yeah, he's kind of like everywhere, knows everything.
Yeah.
He's very talented.
Lots of fun to talk to. And Jacob Dean of Filter Free Radio, which you can hear right here on We Act Radio after this show.
So you get 2.5 hours of Jacob today.
Who could ask for more?
You could ask for 5.
That's true. That's true, but I will take 2.5.
We don't want to wake him up at 6 in the morning, though.
No, he is on the West Coast, and it's a little early out there, so we try and always do our interviews with Jacob as late as possible. Yes.
Yeah.
As usual, lots of stories in the news that aren't getting covered and we think need a little bit more attention, starting with something I've covered year after year here, and we are coming up on the BP Gulf disaster anniversary again on April 20th. 4 years after the spill, we are still getting huge stories coming from the BP oil spill.
Huge stories that just don't seem to hit that, the megaphone.
No. Maybe if Chris Christie goes to the Gulf, somebody will cover it.
Really?
Just saying. In fact, we don't even hear about Hurricane Sandy, and that was so recently.
Other than when it comes to funding and diverting it and using it for political gain.
But there's a new story out from AP, published just this week. 4 years after the spill, questions on long-term health. They are finally starting to release some of the details of long-term health studies. These are going to go on for 15 to 30 years. They followed about 33,000 people. 11,000 of them have agreed to ongoing physical exams, blood work, etc., to test the long-term health effects of the spill. And this story, great reporting from AP.
You don't often say that sentence, quite honestly.
No, but
it's kind of a little righty.
Something that I did not realize, we had this huge BP settlement. As most settlements go, you get $5,000 and you're done, no matter what. Yeah. No matter what the future holds.
Sign away. Here, I will never sue you, I swear.
There is a caveat in the BP settlement that says in future years, if there are physical ailments that people can link to the BP disaster.
The link part.
Yeah. They're still able to go back and sue. And this is a whole group of scientists, a huge medical study. Several universities taking part, including the University of Florida. And they're going to monitor these people.
Cool.
Try and link anything that they may be facing with the BP disaster.
That is linkable.
Right. They're accounting for things like people who smoke, people who, a lot of these are shrimp boat and fishing boats. So they may be working around diesel fuel on a regular basis, et cetera.
It doesn't matter. The lawyers, when you use that word link, toughest thing to prove. So I'm glad there are scientists who are working on this, people of high stature, who have credibility and have the know-how to do that. But they'll still say, hey, do you wear dentures? Do you eat bacon? All those things that you've seen in the movies. Lawyers do that.
Right. Look at what we saw
they pay $1 gazillion to some other doctor. They're usually the same ones that deny like climate change, those kinds of doctors, and say, here's $1 million. Come in and say that it isn't caused by that.
Right.
So it's still a huge uphill battle. They should not be having to be fighting.
I agree.
Should not be having, and we shouldn't be doing it again.
I agree.
Those are the real lessons. I'm glad that they were saying this is what we're going to look at 30 years out. But let's not have to look at another group 30 years from
Right. And the fact of the matter is, this is 4 years since the spill.
Right.
Animals are still suffering there. They're finding deformities in fish species. They're, marine mammals, dolphins, turtles, etc., are still dying. These chemicals, everything that happened there is still going on. It's not all fixed like BP wants you to believe. And, on the 20th, which is Earth Day, perhaps, give a little shout out to the people dealing with the BP disaster who are still dealing with it. So that is, wanted to mention that. In some
Earth Day is April 22nd.
Oh, it's usually the 20th.
It's April 22nd.
Okay, well.
I just, because I looked up some Earth Day songs before the show, and I'd seen that somewhere. But you can celebrate on the 20th if you want, and the 21st, and the 22nd, and the 23rd.
Yes. In some good news, always like to balance that out a little bit. A great story from Alternet, states exploring free community college. Now, we saw this a few months back with Tennessee and Governor Haslam in his drive to 55, wanting 55% of his state to obtain higher education. Well, more states are joining this effort, including, no surprise here, Oregon.
Cool.
There is already a bill that has passed part of the Oregon legislature, and it's being supported by the governor still. And it would make free 2-year community college available to all Oregon high school graduates. This has the obvious benefit of helping people obtain at least a minimum level of higher education.
Sure.
It also helps, students and families who want to go to a 4-year college. Well, they can get 2 years free before moving on. So,
and it helps Oregon as a whole.
Yes.
You have a more educated population who are able to do higher level positions that will earn more money, bring more tax dollars in. It just betters the community as a whole, and every place should be doing this.
Right.
We should be going back to that.
Other states are considering it, as well as, some of the efforts haven't gone too far. An effort by Governor Deval Patrick in Massachusetts failed to pass the state legislature. There are other states looking into this, but thankfully Oregon is pushing full steam ahead.
And as we always say, when the states do these types of things, then the neighbors say, hey, that's a really good deal.
Right.
I'd like to try that here too. And it just builds popular support because that's a popular idea.
Right. You want to attract business? How about having an educated electorate? Just saying, if you have a lot of educated people, you might get some great businesses that want to start up there.
Right.
Yes, this was sponsored.
And you have employees who will move to your state who have children who happen to be, 12, 13, and they're going to want to stay working for your company as their kids graduate from high school and go to community college. It's part of the infrastructure, the educational infrastructure that draws business. So those who are pro-business should love this.
Right. This was sponsored by Oregon State Senator Mark Haas, a Democrat, and he just explained that in previous generations, people in Oregon could easily get a job at lumber mills or factories with just a high school education or less, and those days are gone. That even working
in past days, if you didn't want to go into that type of thing and you wanted a higher education, you could work a part-time job.
Right.
When you have the Bill O'Reillys of the world saying, I painted houses to get through college. Try to paint houses getting through college nowadays. You can't do it.
Exactly.
So,
although I would love to see this be nationwide, be free 4-year education for everybody, or however long you wanted to do it at state universities, it's a start.
We can get there.
We can get there, and yay for Oregon for starting that. Back to some frustrating news, and you gotta love Florida. Always Florida.
I know a story you're going to now. This is amazing.
One of our favorite people to talk to, Nicole Flato of Think Progress Justice, put up a story this week called "New Rule Prohibits Voters in Miami-Dade County from Using the Restroom, No Matter How Long They Wait in Line." Wow. This is such a ridiculous story.
And what happened? So this is what's went on. Florida has really long lines. We saw them. We've seen them at every election.
8, 9, 10-hour long lines.
You've personally stood in them.
Yes.
I did not because I wasn't there for an election. But we've seen them. During the last election, people voted 3-4 hours after the polls had technically line. Well, being in line that long, and especially in the hot sun, you drink a lot of water, you need to use the restroom.
Right.
And there were restrooms provided. But the thing is that there are some people with disabilities that weren't able to use these restrooms. They needed ADA approved restrooms. So in an effort to make sure that everyone's included and to follow the law, it's a federal law, the American with Disabilities Act, is that they wrote a letter to the state saying, for this next election, would you please also comply with the ADA?
Yes.
And their response was, fine. We don't want to comply with the ADA, so nobody gets bathrooms.
Exactly.
That is the Republican response. Think about this. That they essentially said, well, we'll treat everyone equally. You all can't go to the bathroom. If you want gay marriage in, I think it was Oklahoma, nobody can get married. If you want longer voting days in Wisconsin, nobody gets, their way is the quickest way to the bottom for no rights. If you want equal rights, you get none.
They use this methodology as an excuse to take rights away from everybody.
Yeah.
As you said, in Wisconsin, because rural areas didn't need longer voting hours, they said, nobody gets them.
Because we have to treat everyone equally.
So, yes.
It's a cynical way of applying equality.
Disability rights attorney Mark Dubin wrote a letter to the county, Miami-Dade County, asking them, did they have ADA acceptable bathrooms? His quote is, I was expecting them to say either yes, we have, or yes, we will.
Right.
Instead, he got a written response from the county that they would close all restrooms at polling places, quote, to ensure that individuals with disability are not treated unfairly. Really? The interesting part is
shocking.
The interesting part is that this could be still illegal, because simply by not providing a restroom to disabled people, they could already be violating the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Right.
So this could blow up in their face, because, think about people who, diabetics, people taking diuretics, people taking specific medication that require them to have access to a restroom.
Right.
If you do not allow that access, you could be violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. So hopefully that blows up in their face.
Or how about we make the polling places large enough and have early voting long enough that we don't need restrooms, because everyone can walk in like they do in a lot of places in the blue states.
Yes.
I mean, when I voted
10 minutes.
When I voted in New York, I voted almost my whole life in New York. Okay? Yeah, even when I was in college, I stayed registered in my home, we go home and you walk through the line. I mean, you walk in and there's maybe 5 people in there, and there's 6 voting machines. I mean, you cannot vote fast enough to keep the voting machines filled.
And the funny thing is,
I didn't live in the boonies here.
Right. This is the exact opposite from what I have always experienced.
Yeah. And then in Maryland here, we waited a good long time.
It was only
nothing like Florida.
Maybe 45 minutes, an hour.
Yeah.
Compared to some other states, I think we had
They
it
had
pretty
a
good.
lot of polling places, which was amazing here.
Right. It was just a lot of people vote.
Yeah.
There's a really high turnout.
But it was like, winding around different gymnasiums, but they had a lot of machines too.
Right.
So.
In some other good news, good news for now. 100 scientists and economists are calling on the administration to reject Keystone XL. There's been a lot of talk in the past few weeks about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Well, the authors of that report, along with Nobel Prize winners in physics and economics.
What do they know?
Yeah. What do they know? They are urging the administration for a multitude of reasons to reject Keystone. This comes only a week after 200 business leaders, big, huge, prominent business leaders, said that Keystone is a bad business investment. And after 2 million people commented on the State Department's website asking them to reject Keystone XL.
But if you poll it, they're still pulling the wool over the American people's eyes.
Oh, well, we're gonna talk about those polls.
No, really?
Yes, those interesting polls.
Yeah, and also didn't they have their own version of the IPCC or something like that? Like the non-governmental version where they hired tobacco lobbyists to say, hey, this is going to be great.
Yeah,
don't worry about a thing.
Yeah,
it's fine.
It's awesome.
Yeah. Sludge is cool. Sludge is great.
In what should be good news, but I find it rather sad news, Maryland is set to increase their minimum wage to $10.10 an hour. Sounds great, right?
It does. What's wrong with it?
It's not going to happen until 2018.
Are they doing it step by step?
Yes. But think about that. Right now, 10.10 is still actually less than what it would have been.
So by 2018, it'll be even less.
Exactly. Yes. According to the Washington Post, Governor Martin O'Malley has signed the law finalizing Maryland's new minimum wage increase. They're going to start it off here January 1st at $8 an hour, go to $8.25 by July of 2015, $8.75 by July of 2016, $9.25 by July of 2017, and then $10.10 July of 2018. So, okay, it's great that people in Maryland are getting a raise, but, right now, $10.10 is not equal to what wages were.
Yeah.
In terms of buying power in 1968.
We say that, even a little bit of progress is still progress. I almost in a way that's not progress, because the debate in a couple years among the states who have already moved to the 10-10 will be, hey, we should be moving it to 14 or 15 where it actually should be.
Right.
And Maryland will be like, well, we're still in the middle of ours.
Right.
We need to wait.
Well, or
even worse, you get although Maryland's probably not going to go very red at any point anytime soon. But even worse, you end up with, well, we've gone far enough. Let's repeal
cancel the rest.
Let's cancel the rest.
Yes, it also freezes the base wage for tipped workers to $3.63 an hour. While that's better than the federal wage,
that's nonsense.
It's still ridiculous. There are thankfully some great members of the Maryland legislature that are saying, you know what, hopefully before then, the federal government will get their act together, raise the minimum wage, and we won't have to wait.
But the paradigm we've been seeing recently over the last few months is that states are, as the president said in the State of the Union, I'm going to try to do this federally, but you guys can do it locally. And we've seen a lot of localities do this and do it at a better pace than this.
Right.
So to say, well, hopefully the federal government will do it before we get it done, that's kind of the reverse of what we've been seeing. Which,
what I'm hoping is in these states that raise it much faster, they prove that these increases don't kill jobs, and they quiet these talking points from Republicans.
There was a big ridiculous article in the Wall Street Journal. This is how businesses are handling the increase of minimum wage. It was complete and utter anecdotal nonsense.
Yeah. One last quick one, really quick before we run to the break, because I got an email from Isabel Goodman at Represent Us. You may remember a while back last year, we had the president of Represent Us on to talk about the Anti-Corruption Act.
Yeah.
Well, in the wake of McCutcheon, they are holding a big rally in D.C. So I wanted to mention this for anybody who's listening. It's 100 Maryland Ave Northeast. It's the Methodist building right next to the Supreme Court on Tuesday, April 15th at 7:45 p.m. You can look on their website, figure out how to RSVP, and they need people to come and build and hold light panels that they want to, get some great photos explaining that 9 out of 10 Americans want a solution to this corruption. We don't want more money in politics. So,
to which John Roberts says, well, that's kind of just part of the free.
It's gratitude.
Yeah, well, and that's just kind of the way it is. We have a First Amendment.
It's
tough.
It's gratitude, according to Robert.
Tough.
So, yes, go over to represent.us, and you can find out how to participate in that. Lots in store. We definitely have to run to a break. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we'll be back with more. Stick around.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I had the honor of interviewing Jill Stein, the actual Green Party presidential candidate for 2012. Our interview is at our website at filterfreeradio.com if you haven't watched it already. And in the conversation, I told Jill Stein, I was like, I used to work for Thom Hartmann. And where I'm at now is I'm developing a focus on the activism, on the participation, on the real difference making, not so much the political hearsay. And Jill Stein told me essentially words to the effect of, why is it that when people are abused, they always continue to keep running back to the abuser?
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Why do we keep running back to the Democratic Party that keeps abusing us when we as progressives...
FilterFreeRadio.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Luke Brinker.
On Fox's The Kelly File, Fox News senior judicial analyst Andrew Napolitano criticized the Supreme Court's decision not to hear an appeal from a New Mexico photography studio that was sued for discrimination after its owner refused to photograph a same-sex commitment ceremony.
But the compulsion to perform the service, compulsion by law, is what violates the ancient and natural and personal right to refuse to do business with whomever you don't want to do business with without having to justify it to the government. That is a right that is now gone. When the courts force you to perform a service that is not food, shelter, or clothing, they are really forcing you to engage in involuntary servitude.
This is a drastic shift from recent coverage. 2 months ago, as Arizona considered a bill that would have legalized anti-gay business discrimination, Kelly called the law potentially dangerous, while Napolitano called the law profoundly unconstitutional. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Chicago, in the coming months, let's see where we can make progress together. Let's make this a year of sexy liberals. That's what most Americans want.
That's right. Land of Lincoln, home of our president. On April 26th, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is making its triumphant return to Chicago.
Sweet home, Chicago. It should read, tonight only,
Stephanie Miller's
triumphant return.
John Fugelsang, Carlos Alazraqui, and progressive radio and television star Stephanie Miller will perform live at the world-famous Chicago Theater. Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com and at the Chicago Theater box office. Don't miss Stephanie Miller's own twist on Chicago-style politics.
Politics ain't beanbag.
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live April 26th at the Chicago Theater. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
It's Thursday night, and you're grabbing drinks with some friends. Started off with a pitcher for the table, which quickly becomes two. There's pool. And there's the photo booth.
All right, everybody squeeze in. Say cheese!
Followed naturally by an order of wings. And another.
Can we get some extra ranch sauce?
Then there's the ceremonial nightcap.
So what are we doing this weekend?
And lastly, it's back to the car, which, if you're buzzed, could be the most expensive night of your life. Getting pulled over for buzzed driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. Nothing kills a buzz like getting pulled over for buzzed driving, because buzzed driving is drunk driving. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Big thanks to everybody for listening wherever you are checking out the show. Over on the iTunes, maybe listening to the podcast.
The iTunes,
like the interwebs.
Yes.
SoFlo Radio, or of course, We Act Radio 1480 AM in Washington, D.C. Before the break, one of the news stories I mentioned was a bunch of really smart people calling on the administration to reject Keystone.
Right.
Well, the people on the other side keep saying...
All four of them?
Well, they keep saying, Americans want Keystone. We've all seen these commercials.
Right.
That even George Bush and President Clinton and all these, groups and unions and, vets groups that don't actually include any vets, which we talked to Dave Saldana about last week. It turns out, according to In These Times, which is a great magazine, if you haven't checked it out, it's really hard-hitting actual journalism. There's an article over there by Cole Stangler that explains and exposes that these polls that keep being cited are a bunch of horse malarkey.
Okay.
Yes.
How are they?
They are sponsored and commissioned and written by pro-TPP lobbying groups like the National Association of Manufacturers and the Business Roundtable.
What does the TPP have to do with?
Well, business power, corporate power. Come on now.
So
they've commissioned these polls, and they're essentially
they're worded in an interesting way.
Interesting would be one way of putting it.
If the Keystone Pipeline, if we were to tell you the Keystone Pipeline is going to create 1 billion jobs, would you approve of it? It's kind of things like that.
They don't specifically mention Keystone. They don't specifically mention fast track.
If there was an energy project that would create 17 gazillion jobs, would you approve of it?
They ask respondents whether or not they agree to phrases like passage of trade promotion authority to help Congress and the president put in place trade agreements that open foreign markets.
Right. Is this that's about the TPP though?
Yeah. It's about fast track specifically, and thus
my notes say Keystone.
Oh.
That's why I'm so confused.
I'm confused. I
was like, what does this have to do with that?
I linked those two together in my head just because I hate them equally. Yes.
What in the world is going on here?
Yes.
Welcome to Sunday morning on Talking Left.
I'm sure there's polls out there.
Now I know how Dan Coates felt when he went into the wrong subcommittee hearing and started asking questions. If anyone saw that, did you see that video?
Yes, I did. I linked them in my head completely. I don't know where I went with that.
That's okay. No worries.
Okay, no, we're talking about the TPP. I meant that. Okay. Totally. Psych.
It was my fault.
Yeah, no, it was my fault. But anyhow, this is about after me. These polls say things like, "Do you agree that we should open foreign markets to sell more American goods?"
Right.
Nothing about fast track. Nothing about the TPP. Nothing that specifically asks people.
Do you agree to trade agreements that would make you a billionaire? Of course I do.
Right.
If we could trade more openly with the Philippines, you'd win the lottery. Do you agree? Yes, I agree.
One of these questions.
Do you like study hall and dessert? Yes. And puppies? Yes.
One of these questions from the National Association of Manufacturers. Do you agree to the following statement? Congress and the president should work together so that America can negotiate and put in place trade agreements that eliminate barriers and level the playing field.
Wow.
Right. Well, if you added in there something along the lines of leveling the playing field with people who make slave wages and leveling the playing field to give corporations equal power to your government.
I don't even think you have to put it that way. If you were in favor are you in favor of trade agreements that would probably make you and most of your family lose their jobs, if not have their salaries be dropped to about $7 an hour?
It's $7 an hour. You're competing, some of the...
I understand that, but we at least have a floor for now.
Right.
The minimum wage.
Yes. So it's just when you hear these polls, and the same goes for Keystone, actually, just to tie it back in. Dave Saldana explained those, the nonsense involved there. Yeah. But, you can't believe the hype. You can't believe these commercials. You can't believe these polls. If you ask them honestly.
And you see the write-ups by reporters on these polls, and so often there's not even a hyperlink to the poll itself.
Right.
And it's really interesting because if you get to those polls and then it actually has, the 30 or 40 pages and the breakdowns and the questions themselves, it sheds a lot more light on what's going on because these are push polls.
You can actually go and check out you can just Google Business Roundtable poll TPP and you can find it very easily.
Yeah.
And anybody with a brain can see easily how deceptive this poll is.
Well, once upon a time, polls were meant to measure. Now they're meant to push.
Right.
Now the poll itself, they use it as information to kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. But the poll itself is to create the appearance of inevitability. Therefore, you want to jump on this bandwagon too.
Right.
They're political tools, not for measuring, but for pushing a certain agenda. And speaking of pushing a certain agenda, we've really come down hard on our competition, where the millions of people tune in, to the corporate. And I wanted to point out,
right.
I wanted to give a good shout out because, Bernie Sanders and a number of senators wrote letters to the major networks about their Sunday morning shows not covering climate change barely at all. And then that one morning they all did it, but it was a debate of like Marsha Blackburn versus Bill Nye. Bill Nye, nice guy, but debating whether or not there was such a thing. But Bob Schieffer and Face the Nation actually did a discussion on climate change recently on the Sunday morning shows, where it was taken that just like 97% of the scientists and all the ones that actually are scientists and aren't getting paid, climate change is happening, and the discussion was about what policies we could do to work on this. It was the actual discussion that I think that most people who understand what's really going on and don't have their eyes closed, it's the discussion we've wanted, and they did that. And I wanted to applaud them because we've come down on them so hard that when they do it right, keep it up.
Yes.
That was a great thing that they did.
Fair enough.
I just want to say that.
Well,
I still don't like David Kroger.
We absolutely have to run to a break. With that said, we're going to come back.
I'm going to meet that guy. He's like,
I don't think he's listening.
Yes, he is.
Sure, okay. Coming back, we're going to speak with Sam Sachs,
an audio file,
political commentator, about an amazing story that I know I missed until he pointed it out to me. Cuban Twitter and the amazing covert opt behind it. Yes, check it out next here on Talking Left. We'll be right back.
A beautiful place full of wonderful things just waiting to be experienced.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
When I saw the headline, I wanted to laugh out loud. But that's really hard to do when you're gritting your teeth. The headline proclaimed, "Jobs lost during slump regained." It was another smiley face sticker that the establishment media keeps trying to slap over America's jobs crisis. This story gushed that the private sector, which had punted 8.8 million jobs after Wall Street greed crashed the economy in 2007, has now reached the milestone of restoring those jobs. So see, everything is okie dokie, and all of you hard-hit workers should quit belly aching. Beneath the headline, though, is a much grimmer reality. For what has happened to America's workaday majority is not a slump, but a full-blown financial disaster. First, while private sector jobs are up, public service jobs are still short of the number we had before the crash. Also, population growth since 2007 means that several million new job seekers have entered the market. So, happy headline aside, job creation is nowhere near the growing demand for employment. That is truly teeth-gritting news, especially for the millions of long-term unemployed Americans who've been jobless for half a year, 2 years, or more. Second, most of the positions added by the private sector are temporary part-time jobettes with low pay, no benefits, no job security. In fact, the hiring report that prompted the joyous headline shows nearly half of the new jobs were added by temp agencies, restaurants, hotels, and retailers, all notorious low-wage employers. This is Jim Hightower saying, the only thing more shameful than these hopeless media attempts to put a rosy glow on America's unabated jobs crisis is the crisis itself. It shouldn't exist. The headline this story deserves is Wall Street executives, corporate lobbyists, and their congressional hirelings continue to undermine America's middle class.
If you'd like more of Jim Hightower's real populism, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter gives you the real lowdown on which corporations, by name, are doing what to the middle class, our environment, and our democracy. Each month, the Hightower Lowdown brings you facts you didn't know, along with actions you can take to fight back. It also comes with a sense of humor. Hightower believes we can fight the gods and still have fun. Plus, get this, it's cheap. Only $15 brings you 12 issues a year. For real populism, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. The National Labor Relations Board wrapped up 3 days of hearings this week on a complaint against Mercedes-Benz. Workers there charged that Mercedes interfered with the UAW organizing drive by preventing workers from freely talking with co-workers about the union. Mercedes denies it and says it's neutral in the UAW organizing drive. The issue involves restrictions on union talk in so-called team zones at the Vance, Alabama Mercedes plant. Other general discussions are allowed in the zones. The workers say it's a violation of their free speech rights not to be allowed to talk about the union when every other topic, from football to current events, is allowed. Mercedes and the union workers have until May 14th to file final briefs, and the NLRB will then issue a decision. Missouri State House members voted this week 76-68 to advance an anti-union so-called right-to-work bill. Missouri Democrats, though, say that vote means the bill won't go anywhere this year since there weren't enough votes to actually advance it to the state Senate. Current Missouri law allows unions to collect fees from workers covered by collective bargaining agreements that the unions negotiate. This bill would hit unions financially by allowing workers covered under those union contracts to free ride and to not pay dues or fees. The Republican-appointed emergency city manager of Detroit is pressing ahead with slashing pensions of city workers as the city's bankruptcy proceeds in court. Workers are facing a grim Sophie's choice to approve the proposed bankruptcy pension cuts of up to 34% now, or possibly face even steeper pension cuts later. Police and fire pension cuts will not be as steep. AFSCME Council 25 is fighting the cuts. Detroit workers who put 7% of their pay into separate annuity retirement savings funds are also now facing cuts in those savings savings, not just in their monthly pension checks. In the bankruptcy proceeding, 32,000 retirees will get ballots to vote on those proposed cuts in May. Airport shuttle bus workers at Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix are on strike against Veolia Transportation. Amalgamated Transport Workers Union Local 1433 says that the high cost of family health care is one of the main issues. The union says the French-owned Veolia is insisting some employees pay more for family health care than what they earn in a month. Those employees are paid $11 an hour. Other issues include wages, holidays, sick leave, discipline procedures, and vacations, among others. The AFL-CIO is joining the Infrastructure Week 2014 Steering Committee. The Labor Federation is joining leading business groups to build awareness and educate the public and policymakers on America's infrastructure challenges, May 12th through the 16th in Washington, D.C. AFL-CIO President Rich Trumka says America built the world's largest economy in part through smart, timely, and massive investments in infrastructure, and it's time to do it again. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Association of Manufacturers are among the business groups involved in Infrastructure Week 2014.
Workers Independent News is proud to be heard on The Union Edge, Labor's Talk Radio. Live nationwide weekdays noon to 3 p.m. at theunionedge.com.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
I started going cold turkey. Well, at least when I'm in the car.
I know I shouldn't do it, but it's so hard to stop. That's why I hide it from myself, so I won't be tempted.
I used to do it all the time. I stopped by locking it in my glove compartment.
My friend used to do it way too much. Now I turn it off when we're in the car.
My solution is simple. I just don't do it. There are lots of ways to stop yourself and others from texting and driving. How will you stop? Tell us at stoptextstoprex.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Last week, an AP investigation found out about a program called Zunio had evaded Cuba's internet restrictions and created a new text messaging like Twitter service. And apparently, that was backed by the U.S. government. Joining us now to talk about this and explain this incredible story is political commentator Sam Sachs. You can follow him on Twitter at Sam Sachs. Always has brilliant reports and investigations to talk about. Sam, thanks for joining us. And what the heck is this story all about?
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you guys this morning. So, you kind of touched on it at the beginning there. AP reported that USAID somehow got a hold of tens of thousands of ordinary Cubans' cell phone numbers. And, internet's kind of sparse in Cuba, but everybody's got cell phones there. And what USAID did with these cell phone numbers is they set up a sort of Twitter-like social media platform through these cell phones. It was called Zunio, and they set it up. They wanted to hide all USAID involvement, all U.S. government involvement. So they set up these shell corporations in the Cayman Islands and in Spain. They hired some executives to run this company, and the executives have said they had no idea that USAID was involved. But what they basically did is they sent a blast out to all these cell phone numbers they acquired to get people to sign up to this new social network, and sure enough, people did, and they attracted up to 40,000 people using their cell phones in this social network. Now, what the AP learned is that USAID was also collecting personal information about these individuals and was going to use this information in the future to organize protests and to reportedly undermine the Cuban government. This is obviously sounds like something that the CIA might be involved in or the NSA might be involved in, but the USAID, which is an agency committed to international development, also has this secondary purpose, which is promoting democratic societies. And that second purpose is often a lot sketchier than the first mission it has. And USAID actually engages in these sort of similar activities all around the world, but they've just been busted in Cuba.
Now, the article that I have in front of me from Al Jazeera calls this explicitly a covert op. Do you think that's a fair categorization of this Twitter-like program? And if so, do you think, without being busted, that it could have been successful to stir unrest in Cuba?
Well, it went belly up after 4 years, within the last few years, on its own without being exposed. And this was after USAID likely gave the Cuban government and Cuban telecoms a lot of money to get more bandwidth, to get more connectivity around there without the Cuban telecoms knowing exactly why. So in the end, it probably violates a bunch of embargo restrictions by giving a bunch of money to Cuban telecoms. Was it covert or not? That seems to be the big question. I mean, USAID shouldn't be running any sort of covert operations. Now, a lot of lawmakers are saying that it was covert. Senator Patrick Leahy, who chairs the Appropriations Subcommittee, which is in charge of funding state and foreign operations, including USAID, didn't have any clue about the program, and he kind of ripped the USAID administrator, Dr. Rajiv Shah, who was testifying from Congress this week, saying, who came up with this cockamamie idea? And Dr. Shah, Administrator Shah, couldn't really answer the question. You also had Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who chairs the House, or she's not the chair, but she sits on the House Subcommittee Appropriations dealing with USAID funding, and she said, look, the goal of this was clearly regime change. This was clearly covert. The White House has pushed back, and some members of Congress who defend USAID have pushed back and say, look, we've been giving USAID $200 million since 1996 for democracy assistance programs in Cuba. But what does democracy assistance in Cuba mean is the big question. Now, interesting, a source told Newsweek this week, a former Foreign Relations Committee staffer in the Senate, said that despite what USAID is claiming, the White House was never briefed on these quote-unquote regime change programs being run out of USAID, and they continued just as they continued under Bush Cheney, which is overfunded and in need of desperate oversight. So that was the kind of situation that all this gets exposed in. And you see USAID desperately saying this isn't covert, but everybody who seems to be in charge of overlooking these programs, not knowing anything about them, suggests otherwise. Or it suggests the same thing we've learned with the NSA, that it's both being operated without the knowledge of these people, and these people who are in charge of an oversight role aren't really doing their job.
Yeah, I have to say, it also casts a lot of, I hate to use the word, but I can't think of a better one. It casts a lot of doubt over social media campaigns in other nations that have pushed for democracy. I want to quickly remind everybody, we're speaking with Sam Sachs, political commentator, one of our brilliant friends. You can follow him on Twitter at Sam Sachs. With this knowledge coming out, or this information rather, about this program in Cuba, does it change your mind, or maybe just cause a little moment of pause on social media campaigns in Egypt or Tanzania or even in Ukraine that we're seeing right now? Like, how do we know that there's not some covert U.S. involvement in the cries for democracy in those nations?
Right. Well, I think it casts a lot of doubt on USAID as a whole agency here. I mean, if you're going to be an international development agency, you rely on governments to partner with and to work with, to build roads, for child survival programs, for a slew of other programs. But if these foreign governments are suspecting that you have these ulterior motives to destabilize governments or do anything like that, you're going to really harm USAID's mission going forward. And but this isn't really anything new. I mean, USAID has been operating since the 60s, since the 70s in countries. Most recently, USAID played a pretty large role in the Maidan protests in Ukraine. So this secondary mission of democracy assistance is something that has been with USAID for a long time, and could cripple its other activities around the world. Interesting thing about Cuba, and this was brought up in the hearing this week, Senator Leahy's hearing this week, is that he asked the Administrator Shah, why is USAID engaging in these sort of government undermining activities in Cuba? Why aren't they doing what they do best and working with the Cuban government for child survival programs, and through that trying to initiate better relations with Cuba? And Shah admitted that USAID is outlawed from doing that sort of activity in Cuba based on this amendment passed in 1996 called the Helms-Burton Amendment. They're they're not allowed to engage in these sort of humanitarian missions there. So really the only thing they can engage in is creating these fake Twitter accounts and trying to undermine the government there. But I think it really shows how afraid our lawmakers are of Cuba and the mission that they've given USAID in Cuba. No to helping sick kids with asthma. Yes to fomenting revolution. It's really bizarre.
It is really bizarre. I realized I also said Tanzania. I meant Tunisia. It seems like something.
Who knows? It might be Tanzania too.
Yeah, that's true. It seems like this is something out of like a spy novel or some ridiculous conspiracy theory, and yet it seems like there's a lot of evidence that this is happening.
Yeah, and another interesting thing is we've seen these NSA slides come out over the last 8 or 9 months from Edward Snowden, and we see how interested the NSA and its British spying counterpartner GCHQ are in using social media for, and the slides explicitly say this, one was published on The Intercept this week, how they're going to be using Twitter and Facebook and other social media outlets for deception, for mass messaging, for propaganda, for psychology. And when this was all discovered, the NSA are saying these are covert actions that are being exposed. Edward Snowden needs to be thrown in jail. But when USAID is exposed doing the same thing with social media, they run away and say that it's not covert action. This is completely out in the open. One thing that might change out of all this, and we saw it from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on Thursday, is Senator Bob Menendez, the chair of that committee, who supports USAID, and once this program was discovered, said that he was happy that USAID was running this program, giving Cubans this social media platform to interact with each other. He's since ordered a review, not just of Zunzuneo and all the documents related to this Cuban Twitter program, but all of USAID's democracy assistance programs moving forward. He basically said, look, we need to figure out what exactly is going on if we're going to be conducting proper oversight in this committee. So he's ordered a review of pretty much the entirety of USAID's secondary mission of promoting democracy around the world. So it'll be interesting to see what comes out of that review. These are lawmakers who've given tons of money to USAID to do this sort of activity around the world, but now that it's been splashed across newspapers around the world, is that going to cause them to change their tune about the agency?
Yeah, and I almost wonder if it would cause problems in genuine grassroots push for democracy in other nations where, people on social media, as well as governments, as well as people around the world, will now look at these movements and have to pause and think, hey, is this just a U.S.-backed, U.S.-pushed conspiracy?
As well as people who want to work for USAID in the future. I mean, a lot of people who want to work for USAID aren't interested in toppling the Cuban government. They're interested in helping kids and helping families and ending poverty. And yet, and you have the story of Alan Gross, who was a contractor for USAID 4 years ago, who was arrested in Cuba in 2009. He's been sitting in a jail cell in Cuba for the last 4 years. He just recently has gone on a hunger strike. But he was arrested because he was working for USAID, going down to communities in Cuba and providing them with high-tech communication equipment like satellite phones and internet access stuff, which is illegal. A lot of that was illegal under the Cuban government, so he was arrested and has been sitting in jail. So what is USAID doing? This development agency putting contractors, workers of theirs, in harm's way, committing crimes in foreign countries that put them in jail, and they're not there to help the person. Senator Leahy had very strong words about USAID's role in the arrest of Alan Gross and how the Obama administration has completely botched any attempts to release Mr. Gross. And now that this story is coming out about Cuban Twitter and efforts that USAID made at undermining the government through that, it's going to further hamper efforts to release Alan Gross. So this seems to be an agency that's sort of lost its way, and it's not only ruining its own reputation around the world, but putting a lot of its workers in danger as well.
Yeah, I mean, this story is just one of those that didn't get a lot of coverage this week, and it's really eye-opening and amazing. It actually feels like something out of a CIA spy novel. But Sam, thank you for breaking this down for us, and hopefully we'll watch this story, see what else comes out from this review, and you'll join us again to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you. Sam Sachs, political commentator. You can follow him on Twitter at Sam Sachs. He posts some brilliant stuff, and you definitely want to check it out. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
So, who is responsible for these outrages?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. In the wake of another tragic shooting at Fort Hood, conservative pundits were quick to blame gun regulations and Democrats for not allowing soldiers to carry guns on military bases. On Fox & Friends, co-host Steve Doocy made this claim.
Now, keep in mind, it was back, I believe it was during the Bill Clinton administration, where they decided that men and women on base shouldn't be able to carry arms, even though they're trained professionals.
As the New Republic explained, it was a 1992 DoD directive issued under former President George H.W. Bush that established the rules limiting firearms on military bases. Bill Clinton didn't take office until January 1993. On Fox's America's News HQ, retired four-star General Jack Keane pushed back on that idea and explains why, in practice, arming servicemen and women on bases is not a good idea.
Can you imagine the first responders coming on a scene and there's people shooting all over the place and they have to determine who is friend and who is foe? The soldiers, they do know how to defend themselves, but they're not policemen. They are not trained to control a violent situation and de-escalate it.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
The news of raising the minimum wage sounded great, $11.50 an hour in Washington, D.C. and in Maryland, in the counties in Maryland, where I used to live in Montgomery County. Sounds great, but I thought I heard something in there that wasn't too hot. What was that one little bit there?
That's scheduled to be in place by 2016.
Oh, that part, right. Yeah, well, sure, we'll throw you a bone. A couple years from now. So what is your New Year's revolution? Do you make minimum wage and you can't survive?
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
The fact of the matter is, it's not nearly enough, doesn't go far enough. Raising the minimum wage will help people, and as part of building resistance movements, getting those disenfranchised college students who are unemployed and underemployed, along with the service sector workers who are all living in poverty. If you're able to get those two facets of our society together and organize them, well, then we should have a revolt. We should have enough to shut down parts of our system in order to demand a higher living standard, better quality of life, just for starters. And nothing will change unless you make it. So hope should be a goal, not just a wish. And then you do something about it.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
Dear Republicans, this coming election year, progressives everywhere want to thank you from the bottom of our bleeding hearts for being you. Go! From your war on women, thanks for pissing off half the country. Oops. To the government shutdown, absolutely brilliant.
You must be stupid.
We'd send flowers to each and every clown and carnival barker in your broken, dysfunctional party, but instead, we're throwing a party. On Saturday, May 10th, the world-famous Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico for some good old midterm mocking. Stephanie Miller and her Sexy Liberal players will perform live on stage at Popejoy Hall. Tickets are available online at UNMtickets.com. Don't miss the Sexy Liberal Schadenfreude.
What the hell is that?
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, May 10th at Popejoy Hall in Albuquerque. Go to UNMtickets.com. Listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Hope everybody out there is having a great morning so far, but I have to ask.
It's so nice out. How can you, of course, everyone's everywhere, but I know that that's not good radio to say talk about the weather, but we've been waiting for spring for quite a while.
Yes.
That's why we are pumped up.
Yes.
It isn't just the coffee this morning.
It is not. But I have to ask.
What?
Has everyone listening changed their passwords yet? If you haven't heard about Heartbleed, you should be concerned. You should be changing your passwords. Apparently, a routine coding change back on New Year's Eve in 2011.
A long time ago.
Yes. To the OpenSSL, the system, an open source program that essentially works with encryption. We'll simplify it that way.
When you have the little lock. When you have an HTTPS secure, that little lock thing, most of them are open, the SSL
Now, if you haven't checked that out, and if you haven't changed your passwords, you want to look into this. There's an article up over at salon.com by Andrew Leonard entitled, "The Real Reason You Should Be Freaking Out About Heartbleed." This is open source software, but the point of using open source SSL is that more coders, more programmers look at it and theoretically would have found this error.
Right.
However, it was a simple coding error. It was missed for years. And the real reason you should be concerned about it, according to Andrew Leonard, is that national security agencies, whether our national security agencies or foreign national security agencies, intelligence agencies, could have been exploiting this for years.
Wow.
Now, sure, that would have sounded like a conspiracy theory a year or two ago.
Right.
That would have sounded ridiculous. But after all we know now about the NSA, it is a legitimate concern.
Of course it is. And the NSA, of course, oh no, if we found out about this, we would tell everyone. No, you, come on.
Right.
Come on.
Bruce Schneier, quoted in this article, a longtime security analyst with impeccable credentials, said, at this point, the odds are close to 1 that every target has had its private keys extracted by multiple intelligence agencies. And Leonard explains in this article, by odds are close to 1, Schneier means that the likelihood that Heartbleed bug has already been exploited by everyone from the NSA to the People's Liberation Army is close to 100%. Meaning, odds are close to 1, meaning everybody's
right.
taking advantage of
it
this.
a 1 to -1 odds.
Right.
Not 1%, but 1.
Right. Now, if you changed your passwords right after finding out about this, you probably should change them again.
Really?
Experts are advising that if you changed them the very day you found out about this, you probably want to change them again. You should have waited a day or two because the potentially compromised sites had to upgrade their software.
Right.
Now, many of them found out about this before we did and upgraded, repaired their software before this story went public.
And there were different versions of this SSL.
Right.
That, different sites may not have even been, but to be on the safe side, I mean, it was the middle of the day. We were at the middle of work and I turned to you, I'm like, change our passwords now.
Right.
And you're like, what? You thought we'd actually been hacked at that moment.
Yeah. I mean, you hear about the things Sam was talking about, Sam Sachs, last segment, Cuban Twitter and this covert op trying to influence political movements in other countries using social media.
Yeah.
And it's not out of the realm of possibility.
And that's a sad commentary on the state of intelligence.
It's an incredibly sad commentary.
And especially for progressives who believe that government can be a solution in a lot of situations. It feeds into that conservative nonsense that government is the problem. And I think that's what Sam was talking about. You lose credibility. And when you lose the trust of the people, it's really tough to govern.
Yeah.
It's really
tough to govern. And it actually plays into what we're going to be talking about next hour.
Yeah,
Speaking about people not trusting or believing in the government.
Yeah.
We do have to run to a break. We'll be coming back with Hal Sparks.
We have a question, though.
Yes.
What does Afghanistan and Nevada have in common?
Yeah, think about that during the break. And next hour, we'll be covering that to explain. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano. We'll be back with Hal Sparks, host of the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, which you can hear every Saturday on WCPT. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
It's just implied, but we all know what's going on in this thought bubble. The kids don't know, but we do.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
It's Tuesday, April 8, 2014.
You cannot destroy your economy while embracing some kind of phantom global warming theory, even if that theory might someday be valid.
Someday is today, as study finds CNN and Fox News fail on climate change.
There's two parts of this story, the ocean and the plane. This, I think, is why human beings are not going to survive, because they couldn't see which was the important one.
CNN looks for missing plane, finds an ocean full of garbage. Plus,
it's being billed by the Department of Justice as the largest settlement in an environmental contamination case ever. Bigger even than the BP oil spill settlement a few years ago.
Energy company fined for 85 years of toxic waste dumping.
Better late than never? All of that and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
Of course, I love Mother Earth. Just like the wise Native Americans with the buffalo, I believe we should exploit every part of the planet.
Working on it. This is your Green News Report.
There's still a couple of animals I haven't worn as shoes yet.
Okay, Desi Doyen, we have been complaining on the Green News Report for more than 5 years now about the lack of coverage in the corporate mainstream media about global warming. And now, all of a sudden, we're seeing a special on NBC. We're seeing a new series on Showtime called Years of Living Dangerously about global warming. Has the tide turned on this issue? Pardon the
No, not really. Only for some media outlets. Now, on the heels of the latest UN report last week warning that the window of opportunity is closing to change, now a new study finds that CNN and Fox actually hurt understanding of climate change by undermining climate science.
So we have a few documentary shows, a few specials, but the news that most Americans watch every day is actually reversing our knowledge. No.
Yeah, according to a study by the Union of Concerned Scientists, over the year 2013, MSNBC's coverage of climate change was the most accurate, 93% of the time. CNN's coverage was misleading 1/3 of the time, mostly because they still insist on airing debates with climate change deniers. But at Fox News, reporting on climate change was accurate only 28% of the time. That means they mislead the public on climate change 72% of the time. And that's an improvement.
I was going to say, not surprising. Sounds pretty good for Fox.
Yeah, they used to get it accurate only 7% of the time. It's no wonder Americans are so deeply uninformed about climate change. The news channel misinforms them the vast majority of the time. Here, for example, is the top show on the top cable news channel.
A UN report says that the Earth is in peril, grave danger. But again, nobody really knows whether it's true.
Well, yes, we do. The thousands of scientists who worked on the report that you're reporting on, Bill O'Reilly, say that nobody knows if it's true.
And speaking of CNN, CNN's highly criticized wall-to-wall coverage of the search for the missing Malaysian Airlines plane has actually had one unusual side benefit, forcing CNN to accidentally notice that the ocean is filled. That's complicating their efforts to find the plane. In Fusion TV, comedian Bill Maher criticized the corporate media for once again focusing on the wrong thing.
It's been a sobering experience when 1 week after another we see, oh, there's all this debris floating in the ocean and all this stuff that we have to get out. Yeah, that's the stuff we need to get out of the ocean. Oil slicks and dead whales and cargo and plastic. The focus, as always in America, is on the wrong thing.
We've been covering the Pacific Garbage Patch for some years on the Green News Report. I don't think people understand this huge pile of plastic garbage in the ocean, larger than the state of Texas. And that's only one part of the garbage that's out there in the ocean.
And, of course, after finding all this ocean garbage, CNN immediately returned to ignoring it.
Of course they did.
In other news, a record settlement for toxic waste dumping in the U.S. The Justice Department has announced Anadarko Petroleum has agreed to pay a record $5 billion fine to settle all claims related to toxic chemical waste dumped at thousands of sites across the country by its subsidiary, Kerr-McGee, over 85 years. But don't worry about parent company Anadarko. Their stock soared on news of the settlement, closing up 14%, in part because the DOJ's $5 billion settlement won't really hurt the company at all, as Rachel Maddow explains.
Anadarko is a $51 billion company. On the same day they were ordered to pay that $5 billion fine, investors poured $6 billion back into the company's stock. They made money on the deal. Only in the oil and chemical industry can getting slapped with a $5 billion fine, the largest fine ever in the history of the Republic. Only in that industry can that result in a great day for your bottom line. Pays to be the most profitable industry the world has ever known.
It pays indeed. For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find us and follow us on the Facebook and on the Twitters at Green News Report. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Broadcasting live. This is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you wherever you're hanging out with us. And before the break, we asked you, what do Afghanistan and Nevada have in common? And joining us to talk about that is none other than Hal Sparks, host of the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, Saturdays on WCPT. Hal, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm very glad to, and the fact that I'm able to even come close to being able to answer that question, other than sand, is a joy.
Yes, we posed that question because for anybody who hasn't heard this story, Cliven Bundy, out in Nevada, is saying he does not recognize the federal government's right to charge him to graze his cattle on federal land, and there was a little bit of a standoff yesterday. Did you catch that, Hal?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it was the video is kind of very telling in that they are sending basically like anybody with a chipped tooth or a bad medical history or whatever is the human shield for this weird right wing militia movement guys who are like, hey, anybody here have cancer? Great, okay. Get all the oldest people right in front, and then you guys go up and sit on the cops and throw stuff so that they'll have to taser you because that's what they do.
Yeah.
And then we'll say, they attacked an old lady. And where were these people, by the way, when they were like tasering and gassing sitting students who weren't kicking police dogs, who weren't throwing things? That's the irony of it, I think.
Yeah.
That being yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's amazing. This story, it's essentially this guy fighting the government to be able to use public lands at his own free will, and he'll be damned if he's going to pay us anything for the use of the commons. It just keeps getting worse and worse. What were you about to say?
Yeah, well, this has been going on for 20 years, by the way. Yeah. This isn't like he started doing it last week and they stomped on him because he trespassed accidentally or he's being squozed by the drought or climate change and the horrible government has taken all the good grazing land. They're acting as if it's some sort of bizarre A-Team episode where the federal government is playing the real estate developer that was always the bad guy. The reality is this guy has been feeding his cattle tax-free on this land for 20 years. And essentially anybody else who's a cattle rancher in the area has to pay for land to graze their cattle. This guy has been sidestepping this for 2 decades. Why he gets to do that, and that's a representative of, it's representative of freedom, is beyond me on 2 fronts. One is, if the federal government lets anybody who wants the resources of any sort, because once you do one, it's open to everything else, because that's how the legal system always works. If you can take the grass for free, you can take the uranium for free, you can take the trees for free. And then it's a logging company goes, there's a lot of trees in Yosemite, and those people used to cut those trees back in the 1800s, and so I should have the right to do it. That's exactly what it leads to. But this idiot is so self-centered, he thinks that he's somehow special. Secondly, across the board, this guy's big thing was, my family grazed cattle on that land all the way back to the 1800s. Yeah, but they stopped once the federal government started picking which land was to be saved. And when his neighbors moved in, guess what? He used to his family and his great-great-great-grandfather may have grazed cattle on what is now his neighbor's private land. But he doesn't do that anymore because it's his neighbor's private land. You don't just get to because your great-great-grandparents did. Otherwise, we would be the stupidest, most violent society ever, forever.
Yeah, well, what concerns me the most here is this guy saying he does not recognize the federal government. And when the government says, fine, you're not going to pay your bill here, we're going to take your cows. And then people show up with guns at this rally yesterday. 200 people show up and essentially form a firing line against the police and the agents trying to deal with this situation. And then this morning, I don't know if you caught it, Shane saw this, the guy comes out and says he wants all of the federal ranch people to lay down their weapons and have those weapons brought to him.
Well, yeah. This guy is, first of all, he's Ruby Ridge. It's absurd. Let me, they use this as the big comparison. Okay. Ruby Ridge is a very sad story, and I think there's a lot of culpability on the law enforcement side and how it was handled. I don't think it was wrong that they arrested the guy. I think it's wrong how they went about it, and it was somewhere between when they stormed in and that last week there was a woman who's in her 80s who was raided because she shopped at a garden store and they thought she was growing weed in her basement because of the fertilizer she was buying. That kind of stuff. Those things happen, and they're stupid, and the cops should go, that was dumb, we shouldn't do that. But Ruby Ridge was specifically, this guy essentially didn't have very much money and was selling sawed-off shotguns to kind of pay his bills. And he was coaxed into doing this, and then when they came to serve a warrant on him, he and his family decided to open fire on the police, and and it was this sad sort of all-around wrongdoing. This guy is a cattle rancher with no money problems. Yeah. One of the only ways that he owes $1 million in back taxes for the grazing his cattle has been doing, like the fees and other stuff. Not just taxes, but fees as well. That he owes, which means that he's made money to where that's a simple percentage of it. This guy is not, the guy at Ruby Ridge. This guy is a corporatist. This guy is a corporate success story on that front. He's also insane because he spends probably 95% of his time on his ranch watching YouTube videos and thinking the world is collapsing around him because he doesn't interact with other human beings and thinks somehow that this fall of the republic is actually going on. That's not that surprising because there's a lot of those. The only thing surprising about this guy is that he's got enough money to draw attention to him. He's not one of the losers that gets pulled over, in the sovereign citizen movement, driving to Mexico and gets busted. He's a guy with resources. So here's what he satisfies. It's a big win for them, is that he looks like a maker that's being, attacked by the tyrannical government.
Right. Persecuted by the awful government. I want to quickly remind everybody we're speaking with Hal Sparks, host of the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide, as well as the comedian, musician, like everything. You can check it out on halsparks.com. So Shane came up with this question of how is Nevada and Afghanistan alike? Any thoughts on where we're going with that one?
Well, I mean, certainly this concept of tribal leaders and warlords running certain sections of the place, and the government on top of it constantly trying to manage that as opposed to eradicate or treat it as the ridiculous political force that it is. That would be the primary one, and like I said, a lot of sand.
The definition of warlord: a warlord is a person with power who has both military and civil control over a subnational area due to armed forces loyal to the warlord and not to central authority. And when I read that, I'm like, this guy is a warlord. Yeah. This guy is a warlord. He's not a folk hero, Fox News. He is a warlord. He is defying the central government. He says the central government has no authority over him whatsoever. And here's all the people loyal to me who are going to stand up and are willing to. And we were worried about this with the Second Amenders and the tyrannical government willing to shoot a cop. He keeps saying, well, we're going to be peaceful. But the reason the cops pulled back is because they didn't want to exchange gunfire with these people.
Right.
I mean,
but these people, the problem is it's inflating their ego on that side, because when the cops pull back from this, they think it's a victory on their side instead of The cops are just trying to come up with another version where you guys are all going to jail together.
Right.
And the goofy nature of this is that I'm hoping there's no kind of dumb. I mean, I don't think Obama's going to allow a Waco in this circumstance. But they do have to actually carry out the legal element of the law. And what this guy is fighting for, let's be very clear, is an unfair advantage over every other cattle rancher in the entire state, if not nation. That's what this guy's fighting for. He's not fighting for some right against the government to take his stuff. He's not fighting for the freedom of owning his own land and that they're trying to claim it. He's not even really fighting for some unreasonable back taxes that he has had laid upon him.
Yeah.
He's fighting for the right to have an unfair advantage over every other cattle rancher he knows personally and that he doesn't know personally in the country. And for that matter, every other agribusiness company in the country.
Yeah. Right.
Go ahead.
Just to make it even more ridiculous, sometimes we watch Fox News just to see what the crazy is up to. And yesterday they were featuring this story and show the guy's wife, this ridiculous over the top when they released the cows back into this guy's possession. She's like crying, my babies are coming home, my babies. I had to laugh because I'm like, these are cattle that you have no problem sending to the slaughterhouse, and you're going to cry that you're getting them back and call them your babies.
Right. Well, understand how disconnected from reality these people are. I'm not kidding at all. I mean, they are mentally disconnected from reality and so entitled because I would find it nearly impossible for me personally, and this is just my opinion, but I would find it nearly impossible to believe that this is an all-black president stuff from a cattle rancher in Nevada. They're taking our cows as reparations for slavery. I bet you anything that kind of conversation gets bandied around that table. And the fact that there are the right-wing militia guys that are showing up, those guys are looking to pick a fight. And they've been on the internet for ages saying the great day is coming. Mm-hmm. And they have this illusion that they're going to rise up and start shooting people and somehow take the country back. They actually think that, and they're crazy too.
Oh, yeah. They showed up in flak jackets and camo, and yet this guy's saying this is a peaceful protest. It's peaceful. Then why do you need a flak jacket?
Right. Well, because they think they're going to be shot by the tyrannical government.
Right.
That's why. The fact that they need a rifle, though, is the wrong part. And the fact that they intend to fire back. Mm-hmm. Because if you're really going to make the case that you are absolutely in the right and stuff, then you guys will never do it. You have to Gandhi this like nobody's ever Gandhi'd it before. But the problem is you can't Gandhi your way out of a situation like this because it's not about freedom. It's not about the U.S. Gandhi was essentially saying that the British government was telling the Indian people they couldn't get salt out of the ocean, right, out of the ocean of their own free will. That they had to, that processing had to go through, and so he went and made salt, and that was his big act of getting arrested. Mm-hmm. And he walked 100 miles or something. He walked across the entire country to go do it by him, and did it by himself and got arrested by himself. There was no point where. And it made everybody realize how ridiculous it was. Nobody's going to do that from this. Everybody, you show this in the reality to, and you go, well, what do you say? Just anybody with livestock now, every agribusiness, every multinational agriculture business that's got a pig farm can now just set their animals loose on federal land to graze it at their will without paying for it, and nothing will ever happen to them because nothing ever happened to this guy.
Right.
So. At what point do you want somebody just running their cattle through the mall because it's the quickest route to the big pasture lands that the government was saving on the other side?
Well, and if he doesn't recognize the federal government, then, hopefully he doesn't use the mail system, road system. He doesn't mind if the federal government stops protecting him from the import of beef from other countries.
But the issue here is precedent, is what Hal's talking about. Is precedent. You set up this precedent where you can just give the middle finger to the federal government if you just happen to not like the rules.
Yeah.
What's to stop somebody who's dealing meth from saying, well, I'm just going to get a bunch of guns here, and if you come to arrest me, tough. I don't agree with your DEA. That's a federal agency. I don't agree with the federal government.
Right, exactly. And that's it. And again, there is almost an argument if you believe it's the DEA.
Right.
There's almost an argument for and a nonviolent one, but it's a non-recognition of you could make legal argument, you could go to court and say, I don't recognize this organization's right to control what I'm doing because they are scientifically incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And I can prove that they've shelved reports on marijuana and that they will not reclassify it, and therefore they are an illegitimate organization. Something along those lines. I'm sure somebody's tried it. I don't know if it's been successful. I know it's going to be tried again, at least. But that's different from saying just the government in general. And then having these people come and say, in the name of America or the Constitution, we don't recognize the entire point of the Constitution, which is the establishment of a federal government, is the binding agent of these things. Again, I think a lot of these idiots love America but hate the United States part. They hate the fact that we're all together. It grosses them out and makes them feel weak and gay and pink and small and women and all the other words that make them feel icky. And in this guy's particular thing, you have all these libertarians, and it's the right wing, like I said, the militia folks. I'm not surprised. They'll run up anybody who whips out a gun and wants to take it to a Starbucks and wag it around while he's ordering. These guys will come and back him up because that's their main fixation. They have nothing to give, so they want to make sure nothing can be taken from them. That's right. You notice that because they have nothing extra. They are at the edge of themselves, intellectually and psychologically. They don't think they have anything else to give, so they're just like, look, I just don't want you to take my stuff, and my stuff means my gun. Yes. In the case of the libertarians, though, that are going down there, which, libertarian at its root is a joke. It's not a governing philosophy, it's a personal philosophy, somewhere between learning how to be a pickup artist and personal power or some sort of Zig Ziglar goal-setting workshop. And it's fine if you do it that way. I'm in charge of me. I don't have any issue with what other people do. I'm concerned about how I impact the world, and it's none of my business what other people do, and it's nobody's business what I do. P.S. I'll pay my taxes and be an adult, but I'm going to actually try and be extraordinary. That you can do that, I think. But once you try to govern as a libertarian, it falls completely apart because you can't run something you don't think has worth. It just doesn't work that way. And these idiots, by backing this guy up, are just showing them, I think, everybody in the world, that the Libertarian Party, or what's left of it, or even the Libertarian ideal, has simply become corporate protectionism.
Wow.
Yeah.
That this business guy, because there's tons of people who, get in trouble with the federal government for this exact kind of stuff, but they don't have any resources. They can't feed you when you come hang out at their house.
Right. But if you or I were back due of $1 million in taxes, they would throw our butts in jail, not hand us back our property. And the only difference here is that they're probably trying to avoid a gunfight.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hal, thank you so much for joining us and making light of this conversation. Okay. Hopefully it doesn't turn into a more serious event, but
ultimately these folks have to leave that ground at some point. And if they diffuse it and kind of make them think they won, and then they arrest them singularly later on, which is exactly what's going to happen, which would be the smart move anyways. You don't arrest an army, you arrest the soldiers one at a time, and that's not stupid. That's just tactical smarts anyways.
Right.
That's what's going to happen. And the government's arm is long and patient, and the federal government's not going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
Right.
So the minute they try to, let's see what happens the next time they try to sell their food on the market. Now, I want to see what happens then.
Yeah.
Not that just like, I'm sorry, you can't, because it's one thing to take somebody's cows, but once they cut them up and turn them into steaks, and they're taking them to market, and they go, I'm sorry, you can't sell that here. It's not legally, you can't sell it legally.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah. go home with your meat and eat it. You're not taking anything from them.
It'll be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
Hal,
serious.
thank you very, very much. We always love talking to you. We were going to get into Sebelius, but there was so much commentary on this one. We'll have to talk about it separately. So thank you for joining us. And
it's a gear change. That's a good conversation, though, to have. I think she did great work, and I think she's throwing herself on a grenade.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
That sums it up. Hal Sparks, everybody, host of the Hal Sparks radio program Mega Worldwide. Every Saturday on WCPT, you can check out all things Hal Sparks at halsparks.com. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we will be back with more, so stick around.
Whoa, awesome, totally awesome. All right.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio. Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean. With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I don't care who knows about what I'm doing. If it's just me and the universe, and that's all that knows about what I'm doing, that's fine with me. But I have this internal, some people call it a conscience, some people call it a moral compass. I have something inside of me that's telling me to do something, to show up. And I'm going to do it. And I'm sure that someone out there has a similar voice, or, you know, I'm not saying like, I hear voices. No, not like that.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Just the idea that it doesn't matter who's watching. It doesn't matter who cares. What matters is I know what I'm doing. I know what I believe in. I know what my morals are. I know that I'm standing up for them. And I know that I'm not going to give up. And if that means that everything else goes to in hell in a handbasket, then so be it. At least I know I can sleep at night.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. Right-wing media have rushed to blame restrictions on the ability of soldiers to carry sidearms on military bases for the mass shooting at Fort Hood on April 2nd. But military veterans and base commanders, including Fort Hood's own commanding officer, have said that calls to expand access to firearms on bases are flawed. On MSNBC's Jansen and Company, military analyst and retired Colonel Jack Jacobs added his voice to those critics.
The situation that existed at Fort Hood the other day, in a circumstance in which everybody has weapons, could very easily result, and probably would have resulted, in an enormous mass fratricide, and you would have this all the time. Arming everybody in a civilian situation like at Fort Hood would result in a terrible, terrible tragedy larger than this one.
Jacobs, a recipient of the Medal of Honor, explained that it boils down to military commanders weighing the risks and rewards of arming soldiers on bases.
No responsible commander would ever agree to arm all of his soldiers on post. That's all there is to it. And I know I've commanded lots of troops in and out of combat.
For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
You heard that right, Minnesota. Michelle Bachmann is leaving Congress. And to celebrate, it's out with the crazy.
Bye-bye.
And in with the sexy. Backed by overwhelming popular demand, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Minneapolis June 7th at the State Theater. Comedic geniuses John Fugelsang and Carlos Alazraqui will perform live on stage with the star of all progressive media, Stephanie Miller.
Are they pro-America or anti-America?
Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com. Don't miss this evening of political comedy with a special goodbye to Michelle and Marcus, too.
Clang, clang, clang goes the trolley!
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live June 7th at the State Theater in Minneapolis. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
Hi, this is Savannah Guthrie with an urgent story developing right now in every state and county across America. Despite having more than enough food available in this country, there are nearly 16 million kids, that's 1 in 5 children, struggling with hunger. They often don't even know where their next meal is coming from. And the worst part is, this has been going on for years. There's no excuse for it, and that's why Feeding America is doing its best to put an end to childhood hunger. As a nationwide network of food banks, Feeding America engages local communities in solving hunger by collecting surplus food, giving hope to hungry kids and their families all across our nation. But they need your help. Join me in supporting Feeding America and your local food bank. You can start by going to feedingamerica.org to learn more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're Feeding America.
A message from Feeding America and
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Big thanks to Hal Sparks. Only he can make talking about the warlord in Nevada hilarious.
I hope that meme gets out there.
Yeah, because that's what
Bundy.
he is.
Warlord Bundy. And, we think about Afghanistan. Oh, these remote areas, it must be so tragic up there because the government can't get up there and they're tribal and they just, they have to defend themselves. But there's this one nasty person who...
Sound familiar?
In this little area, in the land management bill said, we don't have enough people because it's such a vast area to keep these cattle off of here. We got all these people with these guns we don't want to have a firefight with. So this guy actually he's a warlord.
Yep.
He's a warlord.
And I'm sorry, calling for people to lay down, for the government to lay down their guns.
That is chutzpah.
That
wow.
is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
The ego.
Speaking of guns, we constantly hear every time there's a mass shooting, and unfortunately, we hear about those far too often. From the NRA and from those on the right, we hear that it's all about mental illness and solving the problem of mental illness.
Remember when Sandy Hook happened and NRA was silent? Mm-hmm. Silent for 4 or 5 days. And it was a Sunday night, and I was trying to, I kept updating, trying to see on the Twitter, how are they going to respond to this? And we caught a radio show that they had put out, kind of floating the idea, but we knew as soon as we heard that radio show what the marching orders were. You don't talk about guns, you talk about crazy people. Mm-hmm. And then you pretend, oh, we're all for reform. Just open up all of your mental health records, everyone in the country, knowing full well that no one in this country who's, a freedom-loving individual, and we all are, not just you crazies out in Nevada, that would never do it. So they could pretend to be reforming, while at the same time never reforming at all.
Right. I just find it interesting that Alternate put out a new piece this week. Nearly 4 million seriously mental ill, still without insurance, all because of the red state donut hole.
Meaning people who earn a certain amount,
right?
That's too much to get Medicaid, but don't earn enough to get Obamacare subsidies. So therefore, are making like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a year. I mean, well below the poverty level, but can't get insurance.
Right. In the 24 states that have
but
refused,
they can get a gun.
In the 24 states that have chosen not to expand Medicaid, it's interesting that these are red states for the most part,
sure.
And they have very weak social services already. So I find it very interesting that there's a correlation between their already ridiculous policy and a high number of mentally ill individuals. People are stressed out. They can't get any help. Sure. Florida alone, 535,000 people listed with a mental illness that now cannot get Medicaid coverage.
But can get a gun.
But they can get a gun. So for the Republicans that all want to talk about mental illness being the solution to gun control policy, which is ridiculous in and of itself. But if that's your policy, if that's your plan, and if that's your suggestion, then how about actually providing people with mental illness coverage?
There you go.
I think it might make a difference.
Yeah.
So we do have to run right back to a break because we ran really long with Hal, but...
With who better?
Yeah. You can't get enough Hal Sparks. No. So lots more coming up, including cultural ignorance and Jim DeMint. We'll be right back.
Don't be redundant.
Give me an N. Give me an F. Give me an L. What does it spell? Greed. The National Football League is continuing to run an off-field power play against its valuable female team players. Women on NFL teams? Yes, not running plays, but on the sidelines, running the synchronized gymnastics and precision dance routines of professional cheerleaders. These women are an integral part of the spirit, entertainment, promotion, and financial success of this $9 billion a year corporate enterprise. Yet they're paid as little as $2.85 an hour, worked like mules, and are constantly abused and cheated. Finally fed up, members of the Oakland Raiderettes cheerleading squad have sued their team's corporate hierarchy for gross labor violations. You'd think the billionaire owners of these sports kingdoms would be embarrassed to be publicly exposed as cheapskate exploiters of women. I mean, why wouldn't they just pay $10 an hour or, what the hell, $100? That's pocket change to them. Instead, the Oakland Raiders have rolled out their army of lawyers claiming that, Thanks to a sneaky mandatory arbitration proviso in the ladies' employment contracts, the cheerleaders cannot go to court but must submit any complaints to a private arbiter. And who would that be? Why, the NFL commissioner himself, whose $44 million a year salary is paid by the team's owners. Why would he side with poverty-paid cheerleaders against the regal owners who feather his own nest? He won't, which is why these indefatigable women are not only challenging the NFL's abuse of them, but also the abuse we all suffer from the absurd corporate-rigged system of forced arbitration. This is Jim Hightower saying, to keep up with the cheerleaders' case, go to levyvinnick.com/blog/news.
If you like these feisty pops of populism that Hightower zings out on the airwaves, check out the Hightower Lowdown. Jim's monthly newsletter provides the in-depth lowdown on what the greed heads of Wall Street and the boneheads of Washington are doing to us behind the scenes. With Hightower's saucy Texas humor and truth-telling populist perspective, the lowdown literally can lift you up. And get this, you can have the lowdown delivered to your mailbox or email each month for only $15 a year. Yes, 12 issues, only $15. Check it out, hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. Senate Republicans on Wednesday blocked the Paycheck Fairness Act. It would have updated and strengthened the Equal Pay Act of 1963 by helping women to speak freely on the job about compensation without employer retribution and making it easier to go to court in pay equity discrimination cases. It would also require legitimate reasons for any existing gender pay inequities. Women are paid on average 78 cents for every dollar men earn on the job. U.S. Senator Barbara Mikulski.
We want the same pay for the same job, and we want it in our law books, and we want it in our checkbooks. We want to finish the job that we began with Lilly Ledbetter 5 years ago. 5 years ago, one of the first bills passed during the Obama administration was that we passed the Lilly Ledbetter bill, which reopened the courthouse door to women who wanted to seek redress for the way they were treated unequally in the workplace.
As U.S. House Republicans continue to deny jobless Americans the long-term unemployment compensation they need, the GOP is floating some new excuses for inaction. House Speaker John Boehner says Democrats are refusing to include private sector job creation measures like the Keystone XL pipeline in the unemployment compensation extension. Boehner and many of the media reports about this issue ignore a compelling reality. Extending unemployment benefits in and of itself actually does create or save jobs. The Congressional Budget Office says extending unemployment benefits will increase employment by 200,000 jobs by the end of 2014. It also boosts gross domestic product. The Economic Policy Institute says failing to extend the jobless benefits will cost our economy as many as 310,000 jobs. In case Boehner needs more job creation evidence, the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities says extending unemployment benefits is one of the most cost-effective ways to help a weak economy. Moody's Analytics, also weighing in, says that each dollar spent on unemployment benefits generates about $1.55 in economic activity. The Association of Flight Attendants, CWA, wants Norwegian Air International investigated for labor standards and business practices. The union's call was adopted by the International Transport Workers Federation, a global federation of 4.5 million transport workers. It's calling on the U.S. Department of Transportation to look closely at Norwegian Air International's alleged circumvention of international labor laws through contracting out pilot and cabin crew jobs. The Flight Attendants Union says Norwegian Air's business model is crafted to circumvent worker protections, creating unfair competition with U.S. carriers.
Workers Independent News puts workers and their unions on the national radio news airwaves every day. To help keep labor's voice on the air, go to laborradio.org.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
So when you get to the corner of Smith and Orchard, you're going to want to take a left.
You are not going to
Then what you're going to
this.
do is turn onto Marcy Avenue.
Just broke up
and go past the first 3 lights and then take the next left.
I don't really
then
think
drive 5
she's
more
happy,
blocks
but
and you should be
who
there.
am I to judge, right?
Park on the
Anyway,
right.
That's
I'll
what
see you
I heard
later
last
tonight.
night.
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
You're listening listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Thank you for hanging out with us, and please go over and like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter, Facebook.com/Talking Left and at Talking Left on Twitter. So before the break, we were talking with Hal Sparks, a few moments ago, talking with Hal Sparks about this Nevada ranch hate the government standoff.
Yeah.
And it
tyrannical government. Tyrannical.
It seems somewhat related to this article you sent me this week, Shane. Article up on Truth Out this week called "Cultural Production of Ignorance Provides Rich Field of Study."
Yeah, they're studying things like it reminded me of the movie. Of course, I've not seen it, but I've heard about it. Idiocracy.
Yeah.
Where you're intentionally creating idiots. And now they're studying this phenomenon, according to this article.
Yes, there's an actual field of study called agnotology, which
I thought it would be foxology,
which is the study of the cultural production of ignorance. And it starts back in the 1960s with the tobacco campaigns,
right.
The misinformation campaigns that they waged on the public, saying that 4 out of 5 doctors smoke Winston's.
Yeah.
That they said there's no link between smoking and cancer, and they got this meme out there to the point where instead of debating how to solve this issue, how to get people to quit smoking, the media and the public were debating whether or not smoking was even bad for you.
Right.
We've seen this morph into the discussion with climate change, where instead of what we do to fix climate change, we're debating whether or not it even exists.
Right. It's an easy way to avoid progress.
Right.
For conservatives to keep things exactly the way they are, or even drag them backwards.
Right.
And it's brilliant if that's what your goal is. Let's take. I had another idea in my head about it. Gun control. We were just talking about that.
Yeah.
Right. If we can argue about whether or not it has to do only with mental illness, we never pass any regulations on background checks because we're still doing, background checks work. Well, just keep legal people from buying it. Instead of actually enacting procedures that would help protect us from needless gun violence, we're debating the causes. It's just a constant barrage of misinformation, and now there's entire networks.
There's entire think tanks devoted to misinformation, changing the background of history, and we saw a great example of that this week.
And on top of it, then they hire polling people to then push more misinformation and then get back responses that don't really mean anything, but you put them out as 90% of it's kind of like 5 out of 6 doctors or 4 out of 6 doctors. Well, 7 out of 10 misinformed Americans agree with TPP, but they don't put the misinformed part in there. And it's the misinformation that's driving a debate that should be over.
Right.
And it should be about what we should do, not whether or not we should do it.
Right. Like 4 out of 5 Republicans think that the government wasn't involved in ending slavery.
Yeah.
We saw a great example of that this week when Jim DeMint, the head of the Heritage Foundation, former senator, came out and said,
the whole idea of being progressive is to progress away from those ideas that made this country great. What we're trying to conserve as conservatives are those things that work. They work today, they work for young people, they work for minorities, and we can change this country and change its course very quickly if we just remember what works.
Okay, now what if somebody, let's say you're talking with a liberal person and they were to turn around and say, oh yeah, well, that Founding Fathers thing worked out really well. Look at the Civil War we had 80 or so years later.
Well, the reason that the slaves were eventually freed was the Constitution. I mean, it was like the conscience of the American people. And unfortunately, there were some court decisions like Dred Scott and others that defined some people as property. But the Constitution kept calling us back to all men are created equal. And we have inalienable rights in the minds of God. But a lot of the move to free the slaves came from the people. It did not come from the federal government. It came from just a growing movement among the people, particularly people of faith, that this was wrong. people like Wilberforce in
England,
Britain, who persisted for years
right,
because of his faith, because of his love for people. So no liberal is going to be able to win a debate that big government freed the slaves. In fact, it was Abraham Lincoln, the very first Republican, who took this on as a cause, and a lot of it was based on a love in his heart that comes from God.
Yeah.
Let's just sit quietly and consider how ridiculous that statement was.
No, we're not going to sit quietly, though.
No, we're not going to sit quietly. There's so much wrong in there that not only do I not know where to start, I don't think that it's necessary to go through all of it.
Right.
But it goes right back to this cultural production of ignorance. Is Jim DeMint there?
Is he a purveyor? Is he a victim?
Right.
I really wonder.
Right.
Because I don't. He believes what he just said. The man, for whatever he believes or whatever, I don't think he ever sits down and says, I'm going to purposely lie at this moment. But I do think there's this cognitive dissonance where you get rid of facts that are plainly there, you ignore them, and then you try to jam whatever facts you can come up with into your own paradigm, your conservative paradigm, forgetting everything about history. The fact that, created equal was not in our Constitution. It was in our Declaration of Independence. But that's a small thing. A lot of people do that. And the way he worded it, the Constitution can harken back to the Declaration. So, I know that people want to jump on him about that. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln was the first Republican president. Abraham Lincoln and what he stood for and what he believed when it came to government does not resemble anything approaching what the current conservatives believe.
Right, but they want to continue to perpetuate that meme so that they, when we think of Abraham Lincoln and we think of this great president that did great things, that people like Jim DeMint keep pushing misinformation that he was all about small government, when in fact
it was a gigantic government effort called the Civil War that is what brought about the end of this. It wasn't just all of a sudden, I'm going to be heavenly now. God told me to, so we're going to lay down our weapons. The government waged a war. We had a declaration, the Emancipation Proclamation, and then it was the government that went through and by the people and amended that Constitution. The Constitution before the Civil War didn't have the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments.
Right.
So when he says it was the Constitution that freed the slaves and the people's conscience, no, it was a war.
And I don't think it was people's conscience in southern plantations that enforced the outcome.
Right. And even when we did pass the 13th, 14th, and 15th, heck, we're still arguing about them.
Right.
They're still trying to repeal parts of the 15th by getting rid of the Voting Rights Act. They want to get rid of the Civil Rights Act. I mean, it's ridiculous. And if you really want to co-opt what Abraham Lincoln stood for on government, this is a quote, the legitimate object of government is to do for the people whatever they need to have done. Okay?
That's Lincoln saying it.
Quote, the best framed and best administered governments are necessarily expensive. There are many such things that they should do. He says, quote, roads, bridges, and the like, providing for the helpless young and afflicted, common schools, the criminal and civil justice departments. Roads, schools, bridges, helping people who are disadvantaged by birth or circumstances, and that government is expensive. Will you sign on to that, Jim DeMint?
Right.
When you say that he was the first Republican, is that what the Republican Party now stands for? And if it doesn't, stop claiming Abraham Lincoln.
Right. Because in fact, Abraham Lincoln also had a thing to say about those taxes that, people like the Looney Tune in Nevada are complaining about.
The warlord.
Yes, the warlord. Lincoln, in that very paper that you're holding, Shane, I'm paraphrasing, but he says that, high taxes on the rich are just because they're not hitting the many poor. That those who can afford it.
I believe it can be sustained, meaning the government, and it does not increase the tax upon the many poor, but upon the wealthy few.
Right.
The wealthy cannot justly complain because the change is equitable. And that's the difference. They when you are arguing with a conservative who says, we should have, equal opportunity, but not equal outcomes, because to everyone having everything equal is communist. The thing is they're fighting a straw man.
Yeah.
Nobody wants everyone to have exactly the same amount of wealth. It's about equitability. And that's a very different term than equal.
Right. But we have to, together as a society, decide that we're going to fight this cultural production of ignorance.
Yeah.
That, companies like Big Tobacco, Big Oil, these lobbyists on the TPP, the fake vets group for Keystone.
Right.
We have to remember that this is nonsense.
Right. Now, what's the phrase that they use? The cultural production of
ignorance. That's
going to be our new phrase. Fighting the cultural production of ignorance.
Right.
That's going to be a new liner.
Exactly.
I love it.
I love it too.
That's what you were here doing, and that's what the stations were on to do.
We do our best. And cultural production of ignorance and whether or not big government is the answer. We're going to get into a little bit of that next.
Ooh,
You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and we'll be back with more. So stick around.
This is not normal.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Coleman Lowndes. 1 week after the White House surpassed its goal of Obamacare enrollees, Health and Human Services Secretary Kathleen Sebelius announced that she is resigning. The right-wing media responded by lobbying personal attacks and demonizing healthcare reform. Here's Fox News legal analyst Judge Andrew Napolitano on Special Report with Brett Baer.
Republicans to relitigate and all of the evils of Obamacare.
And Fox contributor Katie Pavlich on Lou Dobbs Tonight.
But I do want to stress, just because she's resigned, this is not accountability. This is her taking the easy road out.
The reality is that Sebelius oversaw the largest expansion of health insurance coverage since Medicare and Medicaid were implemented in 1965. According to the LA Times, national surveys and enrollment data show that 9.5 million individuals who were previously uninsured in America now have access to affordable health insurance. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
I keep going back to this sports analogy, and I know that a lot of people aren't into the sports thing, and I get that. But, if you got a team going up against another team, let's call them Team Democrats and Team Republicans, and let's say they play the same game over and over and over again for years and years and years and years and years and years and years. And they keep running the same play over and over again. Like the Democrats keep running the same play, the same exact play over and over again. Eventually, the other team's going to figure out, wait a minute, they're going to run that same play again, so we'll anticipate that, prepare for that, and make sure it doesn't happen.
Filter Free Radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
And so trying to solve today's problems with yesterday's solutions causes more problems.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
Chicago, in the coming months, let's see where we can make progress together. Let's make this a year of sexy liberals. That's what most Americans want.
That's right. Land of Lincoln, home of our president. On April 26th, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is making its triumphant return to Chicago.
Sweet home, Chicago. It should read, tonight only,
Stephanie Miller's
triumphant return.
John Fugelsang, Carlos Alazraqui, and progressive radio and television star Stephanie Miller will perform live at the world-famous Chicago Theater. Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com and at the Chicago Theater box office. Don't miss Stephanie Miller's own twist on Chicago-style politics.
Politics ain't beanbag.
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, live April 26th at the Chicago Theater. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
You're struggling with your mortgage. You think about it. You don't do anything but think about it.
What are we going to do if we lose the house? Where are we going to go?
At work.
I can't let anybody find out. I'm so embarrassed.
At dinner.
How can I tell the kids? It's going to wreck their lives.
And at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I don't know what to do. I don't know how to get through this. What's going to happen to us?
It's time to stop thinking. It's time to start dialing. Call 1-888-995-HOPE for a free government program that offers expert one-on-one advice about your mortgage options.
I'm all alone.
No, you're not. We've helped over 1 million homeowners, and we want to help you. And now there are more ways to help. Call 1-888-995-HOPE or visit makinghomeaffordable.gov. Brought to you by the U.S. Treasury.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. before the break, we were talking about the cultural production of ignorance, something I think we're going to talk about here often.
Or the remote control mind.
Bleep. Yeah, we need a bleep button for that one.
We do.
But Randy Lover in the chat room had a much better phrase for that.
And that is also becoming a liner.
Yes, we'll just
with the bleep.
We'll need a bleep button.
Yeah.
Speaking of the production of ignorance, Rush Limbaugh had some things to say about Stephen Colbert and his new job.
His new job at the picking up for David Letterman. And I got to say, Danielle, what are your thoughts on that? I mean,
mixed feelings.
Yeah.
I'm sure he will do a great job.
The guy's amazingly talented. He can do it.
But I think he serves a very important role in essentially educating people about politics who don't have the stomach to really follow and dig about politics. Him and Jon Stewart.
And just the method he uses, the satirical method.
Right.
That's that character. I'm going to miss that character.
Right. It shows how ridiculous the things that the Republican Party advocates for really are.
Certainly conservatives and arch-conservatives. Right. So, I kind of feel like it's a gain and a loss all at the same time.
Yeah. He brings some of his comedy and brilliance to the new
and keep
position.
The politics
right.
That's what's freaking out the people on the right, that he's clearly they feel duped when he went to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They did not know what they were getting.
Best correspondence dinner ever.
Wow. I mean, everyone's seen the tapes. You know what we're talking about.
And if not, go back and watch. I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Oh, of course it is.
Stephen Colbert at the Bush Correspondents' Dinner.
And Bush saying, this ain't funny. Is he mocking me?
But Rush Limbaugh had a few things to say about this, did he not?
Yeah.
CBS has just declared war on the heartland of America.
Declared war?
No longer is comedy going to be a covert assault on traditional American values. Now it's just wide out in the open. What?
I don't think it's that covert. I mean, it's not like he's pretending to not be ridiculous, first and foremost.
Right. CBS has declared war on the heartland of America.
Really?
Now, the thing is that this cultural production of ignorance has made people like Brit Hume on an election night saying, wow, there are more progressive in this country than we had anticipated.
What do you know?
And you know what? Time after time after time, they ignore what the heartland of America actually believes because they're so busy out there trying to use these nonsense polls that they get false information and then they lose sight of what actually people want our government to do.
Right.
The heartland of America is more with Stephen Colbert than with Rush Limbaugh. I don't care how many radio listeners he has because you're just a monopoly anyways of a couple of people owning a lot of radio stations.
Right.
Just because you have a lot of radio stations doesn't mean a lot of people agree with you.
In fact,
we have polls on this. Actual polls.
There are some actual polls that show the vast majority, strong majority.
The heartland of America.
We
say.
Would be much more likely to side with Stephen Colbert and progressives than Rush Limbaugh and Paul Ryan.
And libertarian platforms as well. I think we should probably go through the numbers in the next segment. And,
okay.
And also we can trace, I think we kind of all know how the Republican Party's managed to go so far right. But we're going to talk about the roots of it too.
Yes.
The roots of it and how popular it used to be. And shockingly, how popular it seems to be now, at least in the House of Representatives.
The roots of it and how much of those roots have made their way into Paul Ryan's budget. Turns out Americans don't want it. They didn't want it, and they don't want it now. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano. We'll be back with more, so stick around.
What is this? What's going on?
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Terrestrial radio, they don't want us or yous around no more, so...
They hit us, so we hit them back.
SoFloRadio.com.
It's Thursday, April 10,
2014.
A peer-reviewed climate change study released today finds the threat of man-made global warming to be greatly exaggerated and that it, quote, is not dangerous.
The Heartland Institute says climate change will be good for you.
Ukraine hasn't made its February fuel payment and owes Russia $1.89 billion.
Russia threatens to cut off gas supplies to Europe. Plus,
it looked like a herd of cows.
Attack of the tumbleweeds. No, seriously, attack of the tumbleweeds.
All of those attacks and more straight ahead. From BradBlog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
The UN released a report this week, again, very scary. I mean, every report is scarier than the last. They're like police academy movies. You can't believe that each succeeding one is worse than the ones that came before, but somehow they are.
Oh, snap. Steve Gutenberg slam. This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, in our opening teaser there, we heard Fox News talk about a peer-reviewed report. This report from this pretend climate outfit announcing that CO2 is great for us, global warming's not a problem. What do they mean by peer-reviewed? Has this fossil fuel-funded report actually been peer-reviewed?
Not by any actual scientific community standards. Remember, this was published by the right-wing fossil fuel-funded Heartland Scientific Journal, and it's sort of more like, I would say, pal review rather than peer review. They get their friends to look at it and say, yeah, that's okay.
Which is why one of the actual scientists asked about this study, said, oh, these aren't peers, these aren't actual real scientists. He said,
that's not an assessment of scientists. Mostly that's a bunch of old retired guys that got together.
There you go, a bunch of old retired guys.
Yes, and more on that in a moment. But first, to Russia.
With love?
In the ongoing conflict between Ukraine and Russia. After doubling natural gas prices to Ukraine in February, now Russian President Vladimir Putin this week warned European Union leaders Russia will cut those natural gas deliveries to Ukraine unless Ukraine starts paying that much higher gas bill, and that, in turn, would cut gas deliveries to Europe, which receives its gas from Russia through pipelines that go through Ukraine. So, of course, now in the U.S., the and its friends in Congress are opportunistically attempting to exploit the Ukraine conflict, saying fast-tracking U.S. natural gas exports would be an energy weapon against Russian aggression, even though such infrastructure would take years to complete, and exporting it would actually hurt Americans by increasing domestic natural gas prices. But Democratic Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island has a different idea, telling Pacifica Radio Network News that the U.S. should instead export clean energy, solar panels, and wind turbines to help free Ukraine from Russian influence.
Frankly, we build a lot of that stuff. And if the purpose of the exercise here is to reduce Ukraine's energy dependence on Russia, going to an alternative fossil fuel is one way to do it, but reducing overall demand with renewables is another way to do it, and in the long run, probably a better way.
Meanwhile, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change releases its third and final report on Sunday. A leaked draft of the report spells out the many pathways and policies to cut greenhouse gas emissions going forward, and reportedly presents a wide spectrum of options for policymakers to reduce the risk of catastrophic climate change. But the discredited Heartland Institute says, don't listen to the world's scientists. Climate change will be good. The right-wing fossil fuel-funded group this week put out its own report, as dutifully noted by Fox News.
The non-governmental International Panel on Climate Change, or NIPSI, concludes that there is more carbon in the atmosphere, but it will not cause catastrophic deadly storms. The human impact is small. Plant life thrives on carbon dioxide. With more of it in the atmosphere, the plants will do better.
Phew! That is good to hear. Glad everything's going to be okay after all.
Except for the fact that it conveniently ignores studies demonstrating the opposite. Too much CO2 actually hurts plants and nutrition levels.
And again, this is not a peer-reviewed study. It's a PAL-reviewed study.
And these are the same people who also spent decades telling you smoking is good for you.
Wait, it's not?
Finally, across the West, the ongoing drought has forced cattle ranchers to sell off their herds. With no grazing cattle to eat tumbleweeds, the West is now in tumbleweed trouble.
The apartments back there were buried. They were buried in tumbleweeds.
Couldn't get out of the garage. It was sky high.
Been lived here for 23 years and never seen this.
Oh my, it had to have been about 8 feet tall.
Wait, 8 feet high tumbleweed blocking people inside their garages?
Yes, literally blocking roads and train tracks. Firefighters in Colorado actually had to use chainsaws to free a pregnant woman who was on the verge of going into labor because she was trapped in her home by masses of tumbleweeds.
So because of global warming, we have this drought. Because of the drought, we have to sell off the cows. Because we sold off the cows, we are now prisoners in our own homes from tumbleweed.
Something like that.
Everything's going really well. For much more on those stories and the ones we couldn't get to, please stop by our website at greennews.bradblog.com. While you're there, please consider a donation to help the Green News Report stay on your public airwaves. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Broadcasting live from Washington, D.C., this is Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Big thanks to you, wherever you are checking us out. SoFlo Radio, We Act Radio, or maybe listening to the podcast, which you can subscribe to for free over on iTunes. And hey, while you're there, maybe give us a rating or two.
A good one.
A good one. Or what you really think.
Oh, no. Well, I should give Danielle a rating then.
Speaking of what people really think and ratings, there are some interesting ones over at the National Priorities Project. You can check it out at nationalpriorities.org. When last week, the GOP Republican House of Representatives,
which actually doesn't represent the majority of the people, but still has the majority of the seats. Of course, we all know that gerrymandering story, but go ahead.
They passed Paul Ryan's budget. And it turns out that the vast majority of Americans...
You mean the heartland of America?
The heartland of America.
The heartland of America that CBS has now declared war on, according to Rush Limbaugh.
Right.
Disagrees with Ryan.
They disagree.
Vehemently.
On issue after issue after issue.
When you talk about issues, instead of saying, do you support Paul Ryan or do you support the commies?
Right.
When you have an actual question about a policy.
When you actually ask them, do you want the government to spend money creating jobs?
Spend money.
Spend money. 74% of Americans said yes. 74%. However, Paul Ryan's new budget, no new funding for job creation.
Zero.
In comparison, if, the House progressive budget, the Better Off budget, which is the largest caucus in the House, if their budget was considered and passed, it would include $1.3 trillion over 10 years for job creations through infrastructure, investments, tax credits, and aid to all 50 states.
So 74% of the people, the heartland, agrees with the progressive budget.
What do you know?
26% agrees with the Limbaugh'ites Ryans.
When it comes
the heartland.
When it comes to the Medicaid expansion, same thing. Ryan wants to cut Medicaid, block grant it to the states.
Right.
The House budget would increase funding for Medicaid and
you mean the progressive budget?
Yes. Sorry, the progressive budget, increase funding for Medicaid, but deal with fraud, waste, and abuse. 74% of people also agree with the progressive budget.
The heartland of America that Stephen Colbert has just declared war on.
Right. 70% of people oppose cuts to SNAP benefits, food stamps. However, once again, Paul Ryan cut it and block grant it. The House progressive budget would restore the SNAP benefits to pre-recovery levels and pre-Farm Bill levels, investing $15 billion in it over 10 years.
With which 70%, the heartland of America, agrees with.
The same goes right down the line here with education, closing tax loopholes. 67% support the progressive budget. Education, 69%. Corporate tax rates, you think corporations pay too little in taxes? 66%. 79% of people want to close tax loopholes that ensure corporations pay as much on foreign profits as they do on domestic. Progressive budget deals with all of these things.
Paul Ryan's budget, the heartland of America, agrees with the progressives.
Yes, and Paul Ryan's budget goes in the exact opposite. Actually reduces corporate tax rates from 35 to 25%.
And the effective tax rate, we know in many cases, is zero, if not minus, in the case of many large corporations.
Yep, it goes down the line. Social Security, Medicare, war funding, Pentagon spending, domestic discretionary funding, education, energy, environment, etc.
When you phrase a question in terms of a policy, rather than when you're trying to elicit a certain results so that you can then publish it and then culturally produce more ignorance.
Exactly.
So these are the actual things, the heartland of America.
This is kind of like the difference of saying, and we've seen this in video poll after video poll, do you support Obamacare? No. Do you support the Affordable Care Act? Yes.
Right. Which do you like better?
Right.
Or do you support either of these two?
Yes.
Or, amazing.
And you have to wonder how Paul Ryan and the Republicans got from the days of Lincoln that we just talked about.
Right.
That talked about big government as being the solution and high taxes on the rich being the equitable scenario. How did they get from there to slash and burn federal government policies like we see in the House budget?
Right.
How'd they get there? And, you have to wonder about ideas like abolishing or block granting Medicare and Medicaid, or people like the guy in Nevada who say that compulsory taxes are wrong, unconstitutional. Who would run a platform like we see in many of the Republicans today saying we condemn federal education laws, we oppose government welfare, we call for the privatization of all government lands and waterways?
Now you're reading from a platform. This is a list of a platform. Keep going through it. This is an interesting platform. It sounds familiar.
The repeal of all federal campaign finance laws. Does that sound familiar?
Yeah, we'll have the Supreme Court to do that. Go ahead.
The favor of the repeal of the, quote, fraudulent, virtually bankrupt, and increasingly oppressive Social Security system. Abolishment of the government postal service. Oppose all personal and corporate income taxes, including capital gains taxes. Support the eventual repeal of all taxation. Support the repeal of all laws which impede the ability of any person to find employment, such as minimum wage laws.
So get rid of minimum wage. I mean, these are things that we hear about a lot.
Right.
All the time.
Right. Where did they come from?
Well, what you're reading from
is the David Koch Libertarian Party platform of 1980.
And you can find this at sanders.senate.gov.
Right.
One of Senator Bernie Sanders' staffers found this and has posted what David Koch, when he ran for vice president, was it, in this election in 1980? I think he was running for vice president.
Okay. Vice presidential campaign.
What their platform was. And guess what percentage that party got in 1980?
1%.
1%. Yeah. 1%.
1% of Americans thought that these sounded like good ideas.
Right.
Yet,
but this last week, a majority of the House of Representatives voted in favor of this very platform.
Right. And these are the comments. I mean, put these in perspective. These are the comments we hear out of our elected representatives right now. Things like, big business can't hire more people because government is in the way, because government regulation, like the FAA, the FDA, Consumer Protection Safety Commission, which now the Consumer Protection Financial Bureau.
Financial Protection Board.
It's interesting to me that in 1980, 1% of Americans supported this. Pretty much got laughed out of the park.
Sure.
And
it
yet,
should be still. But if you have $1 billion,
right,
or lots of billions of dollars, and a lot of time and a lot of patience in the Federal Society, and a long-term plan, you get from 1% to over half of the House.
Right.
When you have Citizens United, when you have McCutcheon.
When you have organizations out there like Big Oil, like think tanks, like Big Tobacco, pushing the cultural production of ignorance.
Right. So we've gotten from 1 to greater than, you also have, election laws, gerrymandering. It's amazing how far they have gotten.
Yes.
And how far to the right they've gone. But this is the proof. This is the proof that what money has done.
It is. And, these seem like extreme ideas when we sit here and they are extreme ideas.
They were extreme in 1980. You would have been laughed at.
Right.
Laughed at.
Yet,
you'd said these things. But now they are mainstream. We're debating these again.
Right. And you go through Paul Ryan's budget, and essentially his policies are stepping stones to these Koch brother platform policies. Block granting federal programs to the states, while at the same time you cut taxes so states don't have any money. They have to stretch more people into a limited amount of money. Voucherizing Medicare, giving that to a private corporation.
Right.
because, Medicare Advantage isn't enough.
Right. Now, remember what Rush said. This is what Rush said.
CBS has just declared war on the heartland of America. No.
Now, who's really declared war on the heartland of America?
I would say
Paul Ryan and libertarianism has declared war on the heartland of America. That budget is declaring war, not a comedian moving networks.
Right.
That is not. That is hyperbole and nonsense, Rush Limbaugh.
Well, that's
what the policies that have been adopted, gone from 1% to greater than 50% in the House. That is an attack on the heartland of America. And while conservatives used to want to get rid of FDR in the FDR policies of the New Deal, in Johnson of the Great Society, libertarianism in this radical, extreme right-wing theology of libertarianism is trying to go further back. They want to go back to the 1890s. They want to go pre-Teddy Roosevelt. You go through these things, FDA, Sherman antitrust, any regulation, anything like that. They want to get rid of national parks.
Right.
They're not the Antiquities Act.
They just passed that one.
Teddy Roosevelt, who is the frontiersman. You see all the pictures of the horse. He loved upstate New York and the Adirondacks, and let's preserve this land for the people, the commons. They want to go back to the 1890s.
Well, and it's funny. I think that's why Republicans like Limbaugh are so afraid of Colbert, is because when you sit here and you advocate for these policies, just as they're said, in this kind of platform to this extreme, which is what satirically Colbert does,
right?
It shows how ridiculous they are.
And when you do it and make people laugh, as John Fugelsang always quotes it, when you're telling people the truth, make them laugh or they'll kill you.
Right.
If you make them laugh, they'll love you. They'll love you. And he's going to have a huge platform. And let's hope he uses it for the heartland of America for real.
Yes.
That's my point.
I think it's very important. If you want to know who's really declaring war, it's pretty simple. The GOP. And poll after poll after poll after poll agrees. As long as you don't put a label on it, GOP budget or progressive budget, Americans choose the progressive ideas every single time.
And one way to fight it is to fight the cultural production of ignorance.
Educate, inform, and get people out to vote.
Yep.
So,
and we're going to have Jacob Dean, who is the king of that.
Yes. If you're not fired up and ready to go out and protest,
you will be.
You will be
within the next 45 minutes.
Yes. So
you will be making signs within 35 minutes. You will have your markers out in cardboard. I swear.
And I'm going to tell you in a second about why that's important. What these Koch brother policies lead to, and where we could be again if we don't get out there and get active and start fighting this now. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we'll be back with more, so stick around.
Yeah, sorry about that. The show's gotten a little lowbrow.
What are you talking about? It's like the most hilarious show ever.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Samantha Wyatt. With Equal Pay Day this week, the media is spending a lot of time covering the issue of equal pay for women. On Fox News, however, it was just another opportunity to pretend the pay gap doesn't exist. On The Kelly File, Fox's Megyn Kelly and guest Dana Loesch dismissed the pay gap as a myth, pushing back against the claims of guest Ebony Williams.
When we get beyond this, I think, very superficial labeling of conservative or liberal, the issues, I think we all want equal pay for equal work for women. We all want these policy things that are very much more so the same than they are different.
Yeah, the equal pay for equal myth. Can we talk about things that are in reality and not something based upon a bunked study? Because
okay, but let me jump in there.
Let me jump in.
They don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
Now they think you're anti-woman if you question that meme about equal pay.
In fact, the wage gap is well documented. A report by the American Association of University Women found that women are typically paid just 77% of what men were paid, a gap of 23%. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
Jacob Dean.
With Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
A sense of responsibility. I think that's one of the big things that separates the innocent child from the adult that knows better, is the sense of responsibility. And I know that none of us really like to take on more responsibility because most of us, we don't like to do anything. We like to sit on our ass and not be responsible for anything.
I don't like responsibility.
Exactly. But here's the problem. The people that are most responsible for beginning and really carrying through this revolution, the New Year's revolution, is you and me.
Filter-free radio with Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott.
The ones who have more of a grasp of what's actually happening. And I hate to, give you some homework or more responsibilities, but I think more of the weight of the responsibility is on those of us who know better.
FilterFreeRadio.com.
Dear Republicans, this coming election year, progressives everywhere want to thank you from the bottom of our bleeding hearts for being you. Go! From your war on women, thanks for pissing off half the country. Oops. To the government shutdown, absolutely brilliant.
You must be stupid.
We'd send flowers to each and every clown and carnival barker in your broken, dysfunctional party, but instead, we're throwing a party. On Saturday, May 10th, the world-famous Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Albuquerque, New Mexico for some good old midterm mocking. Stephanie Miller and her Sexy Liberal players will perform live on stage at Popejoy Hall. Tickets are available online at unmtickets.com. Don't miss the Sexy Liberal Schadenfreude.
What the hell is that?
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour, May 10th at Popejoy Hall in Albuquerque. Go to unmtickets.com.
Hey, America. We need to have a little talk. We've got more food in our country than we know what to do with. Food at the grocery store and food in the vending machines, fast food, health food, and seafood. We've got so much food that anything people don't buy, we just throw out. Yet 17 million kids in America struggle with hunger. That ain't right. Luckily, the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks has volunteers gathering excess food and getting it to hungry kids. They're kind of like food angels. Yeah, I made that up. It's kind of catchy. Hello, people. Science, we could solve hunger today. To start, become a food angel yourself by supporting Feeding America in your local food bank at feedingamerica.org. That's a website, duh. We can't do it without your help. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. Just minutes away from speaking to Jacob Dean, the host of Filter Free Radio and the newest addition to React Radio here in D.C. And Jacob is all about getting involved, getting active, and making a difference. It's something he lives, breathes, and talks about.
And does.
I saw this story over at The Nation about an event that happened 100 years ago next week.
Yeah.
And it's one that I think most people are probably familiar with, at least most people listening. Mm-hmm. But I think we need to tell this story again. It's the story of the Ludlow Massacre. Back on April 20th, 1914, more than 1,000 striking coal miners and their families had endured 7 months of frost, blizzard, trying times, trying to protest for the right to join a union. And on the morning of April 20th, 1914, 5:30 a.m., people came in and attacked this tent city of striking laborers. This was a huge camp. The battle lasted for hours, and corporate-backed men came in. I'm looking for the correct word here. I have too much. A corporate-backed militia came in and...
Corporate-backed militias. Where have you heard
sounds
that before?
Familiar? Came in and began firing on the workers, began setting their tents, their camps on fire because union leaders refused to give up on their fight, refused to give up on the effort to form a union. They came in 5:30 a.m. before the sun had even rose. It was a little town near a tiny railroad depot, and it was a huge coal mining town. The workers had grievances, including the right to join a union, dangerous working conditions, unfair practices, unfair pay. They were forced to live in mine-owned housing shacks. So when they started to strike, they had to move to tents because they couldn't even live in their corporate-owned houses. And this strike was an embodiment of the overall labor fight going on throughout the country. What happened that day? More than a dozen people died, including women and children, in that camp. After this massacre, these militia came in, fired on people, including using machine guns. And they were outnumbered. And they say it almost proudly. The militia may have been outnumbered, but they were not outgunned. Came in with machine guns to fire on laborers who only wanted the right to unionize, only wanted the right to stand up to the corporate masters. And people died. But because those people died and word spread about this event throughout the country, papers picked it up, called it a bloody massacre, which it was, it changed something in the American people. It validated how hard people were fighting for the right to stand up against their corporate employers. And the reason why this is so important, and the whole history of it, there's a amazing article that is riveting over at The Nation called Why the Bloodiest Labor Battle in U.S. History Matters Today. And that's because when we talk about policies, like the Libertarian platform, like the GOP policies that they're pushing, these right to work for less laws that are being enacted in state after state after state, this fight against labor, we're getting close to coming back to the situation, coming back to the way things were that led up to this event. And the commented on this and said, if it is read narrowly as an incident in the history of the trade union movement and the coal industry, then it is an angry splotch in the past, fading rapidly amidst new events. However, if it is read as a commentary on a larger question, the relationship of government to corporate power and of both to movements of social protest, then we are dealing with the present. And I find that his words are enough to nearly give me goosebumps. This was 10,000 workers, or 1,000 workers, fighting against the Rockefellers. Think of that in comparison with labor movements today fighting against the Koch brothers.
Right.
And the Rockefellers had to spend lots of money on a big PR campaign after this to try and justify their actions and make labor unions and workers.
I think more of the Walmart family.
There you go.
With a little smiley face jumping from sign to sign saying, it's great to work here.
Right.
It's wonderful to work here.
The Ludlow Massacre is a perfect example of what happens when capitalism gets out of control. It's the point at which the tables could turn and the people rise up and get pissed off and say, you're not going to do that to my fellow American, my brother, my sister, my fellow labor fighter. But if we don't stand up, this could happen again. You have this crazy guy out in Nevada arguing about whether or not the government's valid. It's not that far from people fighting unions because they think they're going to take their job away. Because the Koch brothers and the corporate elite have been out there convincing them as such. They've started the PR campaign early.
They started the PR campaign in the early 80s.
Right. So that when something like this happens, they've already got their talking points.
Right.
We just have to fight back. It's 100 years on April 20th.
TheNation.com.
100 years since the event in Ludlow, and it's definitely worth reading and remembering what those people went through so that we could have the rights in the workplace we have right now, the rights that are slowly and sometimes quickly disappearing. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and we're going to come back with a much happier voice in just a minute. Jacob Dean, host of Filter Free Radio. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Everyone expected just a piece of fluff, but we wanted to do something important. Issue stuff.
It's Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
No matter how small the haul, a thief is a thief, right? If a poverty-wage fast food worker sneaks out a couple of burgers to take home to the kids, the bosses yell, "Thief!" But what do you call it when the bosses steal from those same workers? How about outrageous, disgusting, or simply unbelievable? Well, believe it or not, it's happening every day in multiple ways, and not by a few bad apples, but in what has become routine corporate practice by McDonald's, Burger King, Domino's, and other hugely profitable chains. Technically, it's called wage theft, and it involves such slick-fingered moves as erasing hours from employee time cards, requiring off-the-clock work, not paying for overtime hours, refusing to reimburse workers for gas they bought while making deliveries, or inventing uniform fees and other deductions that illegally drop pay below the minimum wage. Come on, isn't it shameful enough that these global behemoths pay rock-bottom wages without them circling back like low-life pickpockets to steal from their own employees? This is not just corporate thievery, it's thuggery. How low can fast food greed go? So low that the top bosses at headquarters play a sleazy game of hide-and-seek, pretending that they have nothing to do with this ripoff. Personnel practices, they airily claim, are left to local franchisees who are, quote, independent business owners. Bovine excrement. Corporate Central dictates how much mustard each franchise can put on a bun, so to think that it doesn't monitor every dime in payroll is a ludicrous lie. This is Jim Hightower saying, in a recent survey of fast food workers, 9 out of 10 said they have had wages stolen by their bosses. This thievery has become business as usual, and it's worse than shameful. It's slimy. For more information, go to National Employment Law Project at NELP.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a production of Diversified Media Enterprises. I'm Doug Cunningham. General Motors is investing $449 million more into its Hamtramck, Michigan Union plant, adding 1,400 jobs to build next-generation electric vehicles and batteries. A second shift will be added to the plant beginning next year. GM made the announcement Tuesday at the Auto Press Association lunch in Detroit. The Hamtramck plant builds the Chevy Volt and plug-in hybrids Opel Ampera and Holden Volt sold in Europe and Australia. American Postal Workers Union President Mark Demonstein is out to save the People's Postal Service. At the recent Chicago Labor Note, Demonstein said corporate privatizers are salivating at the Postal Service's $65 billion annual revenue. He says it's part of the war on the public good, a drive to smash public worker unions while privatizing services that belong to the people.
The Postal Service does belong to the people. Privatization represents a looting of what belongs to the people. Privatization represents a transfer of wealth from decently paid union workers to the bosses and owners who thrive off non-union, non-living wage jobs. Unionized postal jobs have been one of the few areas of true equal opportunity and equal pay for equal work. And that's part of what's under attack right now in the Postal Service. Privatization robs our communities of decent jobs and the positive impact decent jobs have in creating healthy communities. And privatization of postal services will never provide universal and uniform services because the services will only be provided where a buck can be made.
One example is the deal the Postal Service has with Staples, basically outsourcing some postal work to a private corporation while giving Staples a postal discount in the process.
We're proclaiming that the U.S. mail is not for sale, and we're demanding that these units in Staples stores be staffed with postal employees who are accountable to the public and sworn to uphold the sanctity, security, and privacy.
An anti-union group claims that VW is considering recognizing the UAW at its Chattanooga, Tennessee plant based on cards signed by workers before the recent election there. Workers narrowly rejected UAW membership in that NLRB vote. The union is appealing the election. The UAW won't respond to what it calls idle speculation by anti-union groups. UAW Region 8 Director Gary Castile, though, says the union has a good relationship with VW and is continuing to have productive discussions with VW as the UAW continues to work with the company and its workers. workers. Chicago Teachers Union President Karen Lewis is calling on Illinois Governor Pat Quinn to veto legislation passed by the state Senate that cuts pensions for public workers. Lewis says some retired City of Chicago employees will lose up to a third of their retirement savings over time. Lewis said instead of asking the people who crashed the economic system to pay their fair share, lawmakers are instead brutally attacking the most vulnerable people to impose sacrifices on them. Lewis says it's unconstitutional pension theft, and Governor Quinn should veto it.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Here at the GED Pep Talk Center, we've got a pep talk that can motivate you.
Sometimes things don't always turn out the way you want them to.
You can improve your future. Now get your game face on and take the first step towards a better life. Hurry up. Don't make me repeat myself.
Whatever level of motivation you need, we've got a pep talk for you. Call 1-877-38-YOUR-GED or visit yourged.org for your pep talk and for free classes in your area. GED is a registered trademark of the American Council on Education. Brought to you by Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano. And joining us now is the one, the only, the host of Filter Free Radio, We Act Radio's newest edition, Jacob Dean. How are you, my friend? Happy belated birthday.
Hey, guys. Good morning. So good to be with you, and thank you very much.
What are you, like 25 now?
Just the spring chicken. Yeah,
Yes.
I turned 26 on Friday, April the 11th.
Well, happy birthday.
Thank you. I had the best fried chicken, mashed potatoes and gravy, collard greens, mac and cheese, Southern soul food dinner ever, and I only get it once a year, so it was great, and I'm still feeling the effects of that right now.
I bet. Did you eat that with a side of Lipitor?
Yes, exactly.
Although you are making me want to go make some Southern mac and cheese. So,
yeah, right.
Yeah. Jacob, you are the one. There's lots of stuff. But one of my favorite things about you is your ability to motivate people. Every single time I talk to you, whether it's 5 minutes on the phone or when we're lucky enough to speak with you for a half hour or an hour on the radio, you get me fired up and get me wanting to go out and march on the streets with a sign. And you did some of that, as usual, this, a week ago, 2 weeks ago, with the Progressive Radio Northwest Forum and the Million Blanket March. Tell us about those.
Yeah, absolutely. I try to be a part of the solution as much as possible. Like you said, Danielle, get up and show up and participate. I mean, we have to be the change. If we keep sitting back and waiting for hope to change, we are the ones we're waiting for, and we'll wait a long time. So, I try to be as much a part of that solution as possible. I'll be the first one to admit, like you played the filter-free radio spot on the break, we don't like to do stuff. We don't like responsibility. I'll be the first person to say I'm a hypocrite. I don't like to show up all of the time. I mean, we can only participate in the resistance so much. I get it. People have lives and we have things going on. So what little bit we can do, we should be doing. And a couple of weeks ago, I drove up to Seattle. We drove 7 hours. I slept in the back of a truck and I got to talk to 12 people, and it was great. And Mark Taylor Canfield was there, and Space Dog of Space Dog Radio was there. And we talked about the future of progressive media. We talked about the future of independent media and social networking, and how to create the sustainability that we need moving forward. Clearly, the corporate media, the mainstream media, commercial radio, Clear Channel of the world is not going to promote or sustain anything that would really work against its own best interest, like progressive radio. We've seen the elimination of Seattle's KPTK, Portland's KPOJ, and San Francisco's Green 960, just to name a few that everyone will recognize. And most potential advertisers, most potential investors in commercial radio, especially corporate donors like Walmart or BP or GE, really don't like to endorse something that is critiquing themselves and critiquing the most powerful public figures and the corporate state takeover of our democracy. So, but there are people who can make that happen, and that's the Tom Hartmans of the world. And he takes money from Walmart, turns around and bashes them on the air, and it's great. And and good on Tom for doing it, man. But Walmart's not lining up to advertise on filter-free radio right now, or, I imagine Talking Left, right? So
right.
We have to find an alternative. And right now we're on We Act Radio. It's a nonprofit, community-based, listener-supported, listener-sustained alternative. And it's working. There's one in Portland where I'm at right now, xray.fm. It's really cool. They said, hey, we want to do a progressive talk station. They said, can you give us a couple of bucks? They got $100,000 from supporters. And so we have to find these alternatives that will work, and they're out there. And that's what we talked about in Seattle a couple of weeks ago. Last week, I showed up here in Portland at the Million Blanket March, another protest, demonstration, activism. It was actually the folks from Anonymous Portland, the Guy Fawkes mask wearing people. And I get that kind of turns away a lot of folks, and it's a little scary, and I get that. I showed up just to kind of see what was going on, and come to find out they're trying to organize this event to give free blankets to the homeless in Portland. There was an event that happened with the mayor and a crackdown on all of the homeless around downtown Portland and City Hall, and they now refer to the homeless as campers, and you're not allowed to camp anywhere in downtown, right? So they rough up the people, they take away their blankets and all their things, right? And they're left without nothing, and these people don't have anything to begin with. And here is Anonymous Portland. They've rebranded themselves as Evolve PDX, and they're simply taking donations from estate sales and the like, not spending any money, just simply redistributing the resources that already exist from those who have it to those who don't have it. And not like a Robin Hood, like we're going to go steal your blankets kind of thing. No, it wasn't like that. It was, they took free donations. People showed up, gave blanks. I showed up. I brought a couple blankets and a sleeping bag, and it was great. There was probably 50 to 75 people there, and they did a march to downtown. And I talked personally myself with 2 or 3 folks who are in need, and they were just so grateful that these people were trying to help them out. So that's what it's all about.
And you look at something like that, and it's so simple. So many of us, even if we're broke and working 2 jobs, might have an extra blanket, might have an extra sleeping bag in the closet, that we could stand to live without. And that is something so simple that could be going on all around the country to make a difference in people's lives. Portland isn't the only city that has enacted these laws trying to ban homeless. I think it's part of an effort that they're afraid of occupiers. These laws often came after the Occupy movements. I think it's a hidden attempt to make that illegal before any protests that are sleep in, live in protests like Occupy happened. I think this is also a part of trying to hide the damage of their economic policies. They don't want the people, the the business executives to have to actually look at what their policies cause. The fact that they put people out on the streets. And so you see laws, states shipping them, like Hawaii, giving them plane tickets to other states. You see towns banning them or just picking up the homeless people and dropping them off in other locations. These laws, like you said, no camping or no storage of your of your property on public land. All of these are an effort to fight social change. And that Million Blanket March could really be a Million Blanket March if everybody just wanted to give up a blanket, and it would bring attention to these laws at the same time.
And absolutely, I'm so with you, Danielle. You hit so many great points there. Like you said, first of all, for those of us who have, we're pretty comfortable. Yeah, we're barely existing, some of us, but we do have a few blankets, and you could always spare one. And to someone who has nothing, that's a big deal. But to someone who has a few things, it's really not that big of a deal. And then you see who is creating all of these people who are forced to live on the streets with nothing. What kind of system would create, what kind of creature would create these kinds of things and then just kind of ignore the problem and sweep them under the rug? right? And so that's part of the systemic issues that we do have to address. We do have to address the wealth inequality, the corporate state, these kinds of things. And no one knows how bad it is like those on the inside. I mean, far more than I know or anyone else does. I think the ones who are creating these situations know far better than you and I do how serious this is becoming. And of course, they are preparing for the outrage that they are expecting, and we are expecting, and we are literally trying to organize and motivate and create here.
Right.
They know the rebellion, the nonviolent rebellion is coming, and they're going to prepare for it.
Well, and it goes full circle. Wait, just quickly, I want to remind everybody we're speaking with Jacob Dean, host of Filter Free Radio, We Act Radio's newest edition, which you can check out right after this show. So if you're listening on We Act, don't go anywhere. When we're over, make sure to stick around to listen to Jacob. But it goes right back to this Progressive Radio Forum. You know, those nonviolent rebellions that you're talking about often get stirred up, get the size of them increases when people actually, you know, find out about them, when they can hear about them, when they have great stations like X-Ray, like We Act, that aren't afraid to put people like that on the air and say, hey, you know what? Show up, get involved. As We Act Radio's slogan, do something. It might not be everything. It might not be, you know, giving somebody money. It's just something. Get out there, get active, do something.
Amen. I'm so with you. Amen, Danielle. And a lot of folks don't have the extra funds handy to be able to donate monetarily. We completely understand that. That's why all of our programs are free. All the podcasts are free. Yep. We Act Radio streaming is free, and we get that. And what we ask folks is if you can't give money, give your time. You can't, well, I'm too busy. How about some word of mouth? You can tell 5 friends about this show who've never heard about it, and maybe we'll create some more sustainable revenue for We Act Radio and for Talking Left. It costs money to do these shows, and Danielle and Shano are not working for free. Well, we are working for free. That's the problem, you know, and the show doesn't run on thank yous. So
hey, you know what? I think you and I, and I think it's okay to speak for Shane. I think we'll be happy to run on thank yous if those thank yous actually translate into making a difference in somebody's life, in getting that one person to get out and get involved. I'm cool with that for a long time, for as long as we possibly can. Yeah. In the hopes of just changing that one mind, or getting that one person to move from listening to showing up at a protest, or one more from you know, sitting around complaining about it to signing petitions and calling their Congress members and you know, choosing with their dollars. That's fine with me. I'll take that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I used to be a big mathematician. I used to be the biggest math nerd in the world. Like I was in AP calculus once, and that's a foreign language to me now, but I do retain a little bit of the basic algebra skills. And if money equals speech, like if A equals B, therefore B equals A. So if money equals speech, then speech equals money. And here we are talking, where's the money at? So I'm just saying.
It's all in right-wing radio because the big corporate masters are funding it to keep up the cultural production of ignorance. That is my new talking point, I guess. I don't know what else to call it yet. We'll have to work on that. It's new, but
love it.
Were you going to say something, Shane?
No, I'm listening.
Shane's just listening and smiling.
Mm-hmm. Right. I love it. So I'm with you.
We do have to run to a quick break, but we're going to come back with more Jacob Dean, and hopefully, Jacob, you'll give us a little preview of what's coming up on Filter Free Radio.
You betcha.
All right. You're listening to Talking Left with me, Danielle, and Shano, and special host of Filter Free Radio joining us, Jacob Dean. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
I'm David Schuster, and you're listening to my favorite show other than my own, Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
This is the Media Matters Minute. I'm Samantha Wyatt. This week, President Obama signed 2 executive orders aimed at addressing the wage gap between men and women. But Fox Business host Melissa Francis attempted to justify the gender wage gap with this faulty logic.
I would also point out that men lost jobs at 2.5 times the rate as women in this last recession. I know plenty of families where the man is now out of work and the woman is the one who's working full time, probably because she makes a little less. So she was able to keep her job.
Contrary to Francis's claim, experts have noted that the recession disproportionately affected professions with large numbers of male workers, such as construction. By contrast, industries employing mostly women grew. The AP reports that women have gained nearly 1.1 million of the 1.6 million jobs added to the education and health services sectors since the recession officially ended in June 2009. For more on this and other stories, please visit MediaMatters.org.
Hey friends, Jacob Dean here with exciting news. You can now hear my show, Filter Free Radio, on the free Stitcher mobile app. Just download the free Stitcher app from Stitcher.com or in the App Store and search for Filter Free Radio. That's all there is to it. No syncing, no taking up memory on your device. Just Filter Free Radio on demand for you on the go. Plus, you can rate and review Filter Free Radio on Stitcher. The more you rate, review, and share us, the higher we will rank on Stitcher, and that means the more people will discover Filter Free Radio. It's never been easier to enjoy Filter Free Radio and help us spread the word. So download the free Stitcher app, search for Filter Free Radio, and start benefiting from unfiltered radical truth-telling anytime, anywhere. Thanks, and keep up the good fight.
My fellow Americans, our long national nightmare is over.
You heard that right, Minnesota. Michelle Bachmann is leaving Congress. And to celebrate, it's out with the crazy.
Bye-bye.
And in with the sexy. Backed by overwhelming popular demand, the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour is coming to Minneapolis at the State Theater. Comedic geniuses John Fugelsang and Carlos Alazraqui will perform live on stage with the star of all progressive media, Stephanie Miller.
Are they pro-America or anti-America?
Tickets are available at Ticketmaster.com. Don't miss this evening of political comedy with a special goodbye to Michelle. And Marcus, too.
Clang, clang, clang goes the trolley!
That's the Stephanie Miller Sexy Liberal Comedy Tour. Live June 7th at the State Theater in Minneapolis. Get your tickets now. Go to Ticketmaster.com.
I'm in almost every school bus and classroom. I go to school with your children. We say the Pledge of Allegiance together. You see me around the neighborhood and you tell me that I'm a pretty good kid. Well, I'm one out of every 5 children in America, and I'm struggling with hunger. This problem is closer than you think. My teacher tells me we can grow up to be whatever we want. I want to grow up to be someone who doesn't go to bed hungry. There's enough food in this country to feed everybody. Please visit feedingamerica.org today and find your local food bank for ways to help. Every dollar you donate helps provide 8 meals for kids like me, quietly struggling with hunger. Together, we are Feeding America. Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
You're listening to Talking Left with Danielle and Shano.
Welcome back to Talking Left with me, Danielle and Shano, and our special guest host for the last half hour here, Jacob Dean, the one and only brilliant host of Filter Free Radio, the newest edition of We Act Radio here in DC. Great show you can check out at filterfreeradio.com, and you can listen to it just by sticking around after this show. Any of our streams will play Jacob's, so however you're listening to us, unless you're on SoFlo Radio.
Right.
But if you're listening on our stream or We Act Radio, just stick around and you hear more awesome.
Put.
Yes.
Don't go anywhere.
Yes. And Jacob, what's coming up on Filter Free Radio?
Well, first, if I may, thank you. I'm speechless. I'm forever grateful to you guys and to We Act Radio for airing the program. I'm dead serious. In 3 years that we've been doing our weekly program, we've never been picked up by a radio station, and it's because of you. Not only does this show exist to begin with, but it's also because of you that we are on a radio station now. So I cannot thank you enough.
The people at We Act who run it are really smart people, and they know a great show when they hear it. That's
right.
why you're there. Period.
Oh, but there is well, without further ado, perfect segue. There's a great show coming up, right? And we dive into how our only hope comes through rebellion. Wow, that's a tough one. But we do talk about, of course, the Supreme Court decision on campaign finance. I'm going to share with you some audio, 106 years old, from 1908, from William Jennings Bryan, the progressive socialist candidate for president at the time. Tom Hartman should totally pick this one up. Is audio from William Jennings Bryan from 1908 talking about how campaign finance reform needs to be addressed, and that the dangers of favor-seeking corporations owning our politicians and owning the political system is a big problem. And given the recent, Supreme Court decision to open the floodgates of money into the political system, it should be brought up. So we play some of that audio. We're also going to get into the latest speech from Chris Hedges, we put a link to it up at the top of our website. And again, the title of that speech is called Our Only Hope Comes Through Rebellion. And we talk about the origins of the NSA, the FBI, the CIA, and the elimination and silencing of progressive dissent in the 20th century in an attempt to basically better understand our history so we can better prepare for the future.
I think that's brilliant.
There we go. So that's all coming up. Stay tuned.
Shane just saw a great story. I know in railing against capitalism, railing against policies, and making social change, Pope Francis has done a lot of that recently. And today is Palm Sunday for anybody who doesn't know that. And Shane,
come on, the Pope is cool.
I'm
sorry. The Pope, yes. He not only, he had his prepared homily, he just said, to heck with it, and just went off the cuff. Then he hops in the Pope-mobile, and as he's driving down, he hops out and starts doing selfies with the young people in the crowd. I'm waiting for the mosh pit he's just going to dive into. I mean, this guy's great.
Yes.
And what I mean great, it's a connection with human beings, other human beings, talking about things that human beings care about that are important for the human condition, not for corporate interests and bringing more money into the church.
Wow, I never realized that the Pope and Jacob were so much alike.
And you know darn well that if iPhones were around during Jesus' time, Jesus would have done selfies.
What do you think, Jacob? Right? Wouldn't Jesus have posed for a selfie?
Oh, I'm so with you.
He would have been more about the other people, though, he was posing with than himself, because he's not a selfie type of person.
That's right.
Right. Let me be in the background kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Put this around the shroud of Turin and argue about it, dummies.
I also found a story this week that I thought was amazing. It was interesting and beautiful, but I would love to watch conservatives read it just to see the expression on their face. A story from National Geographic concludes what Americans will look like in 2050. And I have to say,
we are hot. I am sorry, we are hot. Show the picture to the camera.
Yes, anybody who is watching on YouTube can see the picture of what Americans will look like at 2050. And it is a beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Would love to look like her any day of the week. Beautiful woman that is of multi-racial descent.
Yeah.
And
remember George Carlin's? I mean, I can't say exactly what George Carlin said, but in terms of handling racism, why don't we just all bleep until we are brown?
Yeah.
So we can stop worrying about this, because we're all human beings. We're people.
I found it so interesting, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, Jacob. By 2010, 9 million Americans were getting married in interracial relationships, and that number is going up incredibly fast. Young people, especially those under 30, are completely fine with interracial marriage. Hawaii, 4 out of 10 new marriages are interracial. I think this is beautiful for so many reasons. Obviously, that it shows that a large majority of the country is moving away from racism, but isn't George Carlin right? Wouldn't so many of our problems be solved?
Isn't this Pat Buchanan's head right now?
Yes, I'm so with you. Yes, absolutely. It's a wonderful thing. We see the progression of the human race moving forward, and it's a beautiful thing. I don't think that, for all the billions and billions of dollars that the right wing has, billions and billions of dollars cannot buy more old white Republican voters. Right. They are a dying breed, unfortunately, I guess, for them. And so, and I don't wish them ill or anything. No, I never wish anybody ill. The reality is we're all in this together, and that's what this story highlights. Is people are understanding that we are all in this together. We are human beings. We can all come together underneath the same common umbrella of humanity, and I think the best thing about it is if we're serious about creating that real change, creating a real positive difference in the world, it's going to take all of us to be involved. It's not going to just take, Danielle or Shana or the folks at We Act, but every one of us is going to have to be involved. And the best way that we can bring everyone together is find those common grounds. And we are one.
And what more of a common ground than having a connection with multiple heritages?
And on top of it, as a progressive, and we've been talking all this program about how popular progressivism really is when we get down to it. Even nature is on our side.
Yes.
If you think about it, genetics and nature are progressing, and that cannot be stopped by any number of dollars by the billionaire Koch brothers. And nature will progress.
Come on, let's just admit it. We have to say that there is a little bit of Schadenfreude in there just because conservatives would freak out about this story.
Yeah, exactly.
I'd be lying if I said that I didn't think that. So anyhow, I want to say major thanks to Jacob. Happy birthday.
Yeah.
And congratulations for joining the We Act family.
It's so good to be here with you guys. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to join you. I look forward to hanging out and continuing the conversation and keeping us empowered and motivated so we can create the change.
Amen. And to other people who are doing that every day, Sam Sachs and Hal Sparks, big thanks to them. Big thanks to We Act Radio, everybody over there, Alex Lawson, Kimon Freeman, Pete Callahan, Cliff Schechter. We love Mr. George Rodriguez of SoFlo Radio, Boca Brittany, Rocky Mountain Mike, and Nicole Sandler, just because we love her. And big thanks to you guys for everything you do, for participating in this show, for participating in shows like Jacob. And because a lot of the people who are listening are the people who are getting out and doing something. And you guys are the change. You guys are making the difference. And you're the reason why shows like this, shows like Jacob, and every show on We Act does what they do. So stick around for Jacob Dean and Skeptical Scott and Filter Free Radio coming up next on We Act. And everybody else, we'll see you guys next week.